You've been taught that holding on is how you keep things, that love means gripping tighter, that security comes from making sure nothing slips away. But if that were true, why does fear still sit quietly in your chest? Why does the thought of loss disturb your peace? Why does the mind stay restless even when everything seems fine? The truth is simple and unsettling at the same time. What is truly yours does not need to be held, and what needs to be forced was never meant to stay. Buddhist teachings have pointed to this for centuries, not with fear or pressure, but with calm understanding. Life moves, everything changes, and peace begins the moment you stop fighting that truth. When you hold lightly, the heart relaxes and the mind becomes clear. You stop guarding life as if it might betray you, and you begin to live it as it is. Control loosens, resistance softens, and something inside you finally exhales. Tonight, as you listen, you may feel that quiet shift begin. The urge to control fades a little. The need to cling loses its urgency. The tension you've been carrying, often without realizing it, starts to dissolve. You begin to see that detachment is not loss, it is trust. Trust that what belongs with you will remain without force. Trust that what leaves was never meant to be imprisoned by fear. This is not about pushing people away or becoming cold and distant. It is about releasing the anxiety that love must be guarded to survive. It is about allowing life to unfold without tightening your grip at every turn. Nothing real is taken by change, and nothing fragile is made strong by force. Hold lightly, because what is meant to stay will stay. Allow your breath to slow. Allow your grip on the world to soften. Allow peace to enter where fear once lived. This is not an ending, it is a return, to ease, to clarity, to freedom. Are you ready to stop holding so tightly and finally rest? Let us begin. Something quiet happens after the first release. Once the grip loosens, a question naturally appears. If I am not holding so tightly, what am I supposed to do instead? If control is not the answer, what takes its place? This is where detachment is often misunderstood, and where its deepest meaning begins to reveal itself. There is a moment when the mind pauses and realizes that letting go did not cause life to collapse. The sun still rose. People still spoke. The world continued to move. That moment opens a door to a deeper truth, one that Buddhism has carried gently across centuries. Detachment is not the act of stepping away from life. It is the act of trusting life enough to stop strangling it. A quiet curiosity starts to grow here. If I am not meant to withdraw, then what is detachment really asking of me? Detachment in its truest form is not distance, it is trust. It is the understanding that reality does not need to be gripped to be meaningful, protected, or preserved. Most people assume detachment means becoming passive, emotionally unavailable, or uninterested in the world. That misunderstanding has kept countless people locked in fear because they believe the only alternative to control is loss. But Buddhism does not teach abandonment of life. It teaches confidence in life. The instinct to hold tightly comes from a belief that things will fall apart without constant effort. The mind assumes that love will disappear if it is not monitored, that happiness will vanish if it is not secured, that stability requires tension. This belief creates a background anxiety that never truly rests. Even in moments of joy, there is a subtle worry that it could end. Detachment does not erase joy. It removes the fear that shadows it. Trusting reality does not mean being careless or indifferent. It means recognizing that life operates on principles far larger than personal control. Seasons change without permission. Bodies age without negotiation. People evolve in directions that cannot be predicted or commanded. Fighting these truths does not stop them. It only creates friction inside the mind. Detachment begins when that resistance softens. When someone practices detachment as trust, they stop asking life to promise permanence. They stop demanding guarantees. Instead, they meet each moment fully, without trying to freeze it in place. This does not make experiences shallow. It makes them vivid. When the mind is no longer obsessed with securing the future, it becomes present enough to actually experience what is happening now. Many people confuse engagement with attachment. They believe that to care deeply means to cling deeply. But care does not require possession. Presence does not require control. You can show up fully without chaining yourself emotionally to outcomes. In fact, trust-based detachment allows for a richer kind of participation because attention is no longer split between living and protecting. Withdrawal happens when someone is overwhelmed or disappointed by life and decides to numb themselves. Detachment happens when someone understands life clearly and no longer needs to brace against it. One is a closing, the other is an opening. Buddhism consistently points toward openness, not retreat. When you stop gripping reality, you begin to notice how much energy was being spent on fear. Fear of change, fear of loss, fear of uncertainty. That energy becomes available again, and it transforms into clarity. The mind becomes less reactive. Instead of constantly asking, "How do I keep this?" it begins asking, "How do I meet this honestly?" Trusting reality also means trusting yourself within it. Detachment is not blind faith that everything will be pleasant. It is confidence that you can respond to whatever arises. When you trust your ability to meet life, you no longer need to micromanage it. This is where real strength appears, not in control, but in adaptability. A detached mind does not collapse when plans change. It adjusts. It does not panic when people disappoint. It learns. It does not cling to comfort as if survival depends on it. It rests in the knowledge that discomfort is temporary. This flexibility is not weakness, it is resilience. Much suffering comes from treating reality like an enemy that must be subdued. Detachment changes that relationship. Reality becomes something to cooperate with rather than fight against. Pain still happens. Loss still occurs, but the additional suffering created by resistance fades. You stop arguing with what already is. Trusting reality also means releasing the idea that life owes you a specific shape. When expectations loosen, disappointment loses its sharp edge. This does not make you passive or unmotivated. It makes your actions cleaner. You act because action feels right, not because you are trying to secure emotional safety through results. Detachment allows effort without desperation, love without fear, commitment without possession. You can work hard without tying your identity to success. You can care deeply without demanding permanence. This balance is what Buddhism refers to as the middle way, not clinging, not avoiding, simply engaging with wisdom. When detachment is misunderstood, people fear it will drain life of meaning. The opposite happens. Meaning deepens because it is no longer dependent on permanence. A sunset becomes precious precisely because it will not last. A conversation becomes sacred because it cannot be repeated in the same way. Trusting reality allows you to appreciate moments without trying to imprison them. The mind that trusts reality stops rehearsing disaster. It no longer treats uncertainty as a threat. It sees uncertainty as the natural condition of life. This shift alone reduces immense mental strain. Anxiety thrives on the illusion that certainty is possible if you worry enough. Detachment exposes that illusion. There is also a quiet humility in detachment. It acknowledges that life is larger than personal will. This humility is not humiliation, it is relief. You are no longer responsible for holding the universe together. You are only responsible for meeting your own experience with awareness and integrity. When trust replaces control, relationships change. You listen more, you react less, you allow others to be themselves instead of trying to mold them into sources of security. This creates space for genuine connection. People feel less managed and more met. Detachment, far from isolating, often deepens intimacy. Trusting reality also dissolves the constant internal commentary about how things should be. The mind becomes quieter because it is no longer fighting imaginary battles with the present moment. Silence grows not because you suppress thoughts, but because there is less conflict generating them. This kind of detachment does not happen through force. You cannot command yourself to trust reality. It develops gradually as you observe how clinging creates tension and how letting go creates ease. Each small release reinforces confidence. Each moment of non-resistance becomes proof that life continues without your grip. Over time, you begin to sense a subtle friendliness in reality, not because everything is pleasant, but because everything is workable. Even pain becomes something that can be met, learned from, and released. This realization is deeply stabilizing. You stop bracing for collapse. Detachment as trust also reshapes how you experience uncertainty about the future. Instead of seeing it as a void to fear, you see it as open space. Possibility replaces dread. Flexibility replaces rigidity. You prepare without panicking. You plan without clinging. The nervous system responds to this shift. When the mind stops signaling constant threat, the body relaxes. Breathing deepens. Muscles soften. Rest becomes more accessible. Detachment is not only a philosophical stance, it is a physiological relief. Trusting reality does not mean trusting that everything will go your way. It means trusting that nothing needs to go your way for you to remain whole. This is the quiet power Buddhism points toward, a power that does not dominate but endures. As this understanding settles, something else becomes clear. Detachment is not something you apply to life from the outside. It is something that emerges when you stop misunderstanding life. When you stop demanding permanence, reality no longer feels like a threat. It feels like a flow you can stand within. This is why true detachment feels warm rather than cold. It is rooted in acceptance, not avoidance. It allows you to participate fully without being consumed. You walk through life with open hands instead of clenched fists, and as this trust deepens, a subtle confidence forms beneath everything you do. You begin to sense that whatever comes, you will meet it. Whatever leaves, you will survive it. Whatever stays, you will appreciate it without fear. That confidence is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply steadies you. And from that steadiness, life begins to feel less like something you must defend and more like something you can finally live. As the grip softens and the mind grows quieter, something subtle becomes visible. Even without tension, there is a lingering habit that tries to return, a reflex that says, hold on just a little more, protect this, secure that. It does not shout, it whispers, and that whisper is not desire. It is fear, speaking softly so it will not be questioned. There is a strange discomfort in realizing this. Many of the things you believed were driven by love, passion, or ambition begin to feel different when seen closely. A quiet curiosity appears. What if the force behind so much effort was not wanting more but fearing less? What if clinging was never about reaching forward, but about bracing against change? Clinging feels active, but it is defensive. Desire moves toward life with openness. Fear moves toward life with armor. At first glance, they can look identical. Both pursue relationships, goals, recognition, stability. But the inner experience is completely different. Desire feels alive and spacious. Fear feels urgent and tight. When fear disguises itself as desire, it borrows noble language. It calls itself commitment. It calls itself caring deeply. It calls itself responsibility. But beneath those labels is a refusal to accept impermanence. The mind wants assurance in a world that offers none, and clinging becomes the strategy to create the illusion of safety. Impermanence is not dramatic most of the time. It is subtle. Things slowly change, people evolve, feelings shift, circumstances rearrange. Fear does not like subtlety. It wants fixed ground. When it cannot find it, it tries to build it by holding harder. This is why clinging often increases when something matters most. The more meaningful an experience feels, the more fear arises around losing it. Instead of allowing meaning to deepen presence, fear hijacks it and turns it into tension. The mind begins to watch the experience rather than live it. Fear of impermanence does not announce itself clearly. It does not say, "I am afraid things will end." It says, "I must make this last." It does not say, "I cannot tolerate uncertainty." It says, "I need a plan." It does not say, "I am afraid of change." It says, "Things should stay this way." This is how fear pretends to be certainty. It adopts confident language. It sounds decisive. It feels convincing. But certainty built on fear is brittle. It cracks under pressure because it is fighting reality instead of working with it. Clinging also distorts motivation. When fear is present, effort becomes compulsive, rest feels dangerous, letting go feels irresponsible. The mind stays busy because stillness would expose uncertainty. This constant activity can look like drive, but it is actually avoidance. Desire does not fear stillness. Desire can pause, fear cannot. Fear needs movement to feel alive. It needs to do something to feel in control. This is why clinging often leads to burnout. The system is always on alert. One of the clearest ways to see fear beneath clinging is to notice the body. When attachment is activated, the body tightens, shoulders lift, jaw clenches, breath shortens. This is not the body of joy. It is the body preparing for threat. Love does not prepare for threat. Love responds to what is present. Fear prepares for what might go wrong. When attachment is fear-based, the mind spends more time rehearsing loss than enjoying connection. This is especially visible in relationships. When fear disguises itself as love, attention turns into monitoring, care turns into checking, support turns into control. The intention may be to protect the relationship, but the effect is tension. The other person feels managed rather than met. Fear-based attachment struggles with change in others. Growth feels dangerous because it introduces uncertainty. Instead of celebrating evolution, fear tries to preserve a familiar version of the person. This is not because of love for who they are now, but fear of losing what felt stable before. Ambition follows a similar pattern. Healthy ambition is curiosity in motion. Fear-based ambition is identity protection. It needs success to confirm worth. It needs progress to avoid feeling replaceable. When ambition is driven by fear, satisfaction never lasts. Each achievement only raises the bar for the next guarantee. This is why clinging rarely brings peace, even when it succeeds. The mind immediately looks for the next thing that could be lost. Fear does not feel safe with success. It only feels temporarily distracted. Clinging also shrinks perception. When fear is active, awareness narrows. The mind becomes obsessed with one outcome, one person, one identity. Everything else fades into the background. Life becomes smaller, even when it appears full. Desire expands awareness. Fear contracts it. This contraction is what makes attachment feel suffocating over time. You are not holding life. Life feels like it is holding you. Another sign of fear beneath clinging is intolerance for uncertainty. When the future is unclear, the mind becomes restless. It seeks answers, predictions, reassurance. It tries to settle discomfort by knowing. But knowing is not always possible. Life does not reveal itself on demand. Fear struggles with this. It would rather cling to a bad certainty than face an open unknown. This is why people sometimes stay attached to situations that cause pain. The pain is familiar. The unknown feels threatening. Clinging can also attach to suffering itself. Stories of loss, resentment, or regret become identities. Letting go feels like betrayal of the past. Fear convinces the mind that holding pain is safer than risking new uncertainty. The tragedy of fear-based attachment is that it sacrifices the present for an illusion of future safety. Moments are missed, joy is diluted, connection becomes conditional, Life is postponed in the name of protection. Fear also mistakes vigilance for care. It believes that worrying proves importance, that anxiety shows love. But worry does not protect what you value. It only drains you. Care without fear is attentive, not tense. When fear is seen clearly, there is often resistance. The ego does not like to admit vulnerability. It prefers to see itself as strong, committed, disciplined. Acknowledging fear feels like weakness, but denying fear gives it control. Understanding fear does not mean obeying it. It means recognizing its presence without letting it dictate behavior. This is where detachment deepens. You stop acting from panic. You begin responding from awareness. As this awareness grows, clinging loses its justification. The mind sees that holding tighter does not stop change. It only increases suffering. This realization is not intellectual, it is experiential. It comes from noticing how the body and mind respond when fear is driving. Fear wants certainty because it doubts resilience. It does not trust that you can meet loss, change, or disappointment. Detachment begins to build that trust. Not by eliminating fear, but by showing the mind that uncertainty can be lived with. Gradually, the nervous system learns that not everything needs to be secured. That safety does not come from permanence. That identity can be flexible. This learning happens through small releases, letting plans change, allowing feelings to pass, not fixing everything immediately. Fear weakens when it is no longer rewarded with obedience. When the mind stops rushing to reassure it, fear loses urgency. It becomes information rather than command. Desire reclaims its natural role. It becomes exploratory instead of defensive. You move toward what matters without chaining yourself to outcomes. You engage without gripping. You care without guarding. This shift also changes how loss is experienced. Loss still hurts. Detachment does not numb pain, but pain is no longer compounded by the belief that something has gone wrong with reality. Grief moves through instead of becoming a permanent structure. Fear of impermanence dissolves slowly, not because impermanence disappears, but because it is no longer misunderstood. Change stops feeling like betrayal. It feels like movement. Clinging had promised certainty but delivered anxiety. Detachment offers no guarantees but delivers peace, not a dramatic peace, a quiet one, the kind that does not depend on conditions. The mind becomes less interested in owning experiences and more interested in understanding them. You stop asking, "How do I keep this?" and start asking, "How do I meet this honestly?" That question changes everything. Fear loses its disguise when you stop mistaking intensity for truth. Strong emotion does not mean something must be held forever. It means something is alive now. Detachment allows that aliveness without fear of its ending. As fear loosens its grip, there is more room for trust. Not blind trust, but grounded trust. Trust in your ability to respond. Trust in the resilience of awareness. Trust that life does not need to be frozen to be meaningful. Clinging fades not because you reject it, but because you see through it. It no longer feels like protection. It feels like weight. And when the mind recognizes unnecessary weight, it naturally sets it down. What remains is not emptiness, but space. Space to breathe, space to feel, space to live without constantly negotiating with fear. As the grip loosens and fear loses its authority, another pattern quietly steps into view. It has been there all along, so familiar it almost feels invisible. A single word the mind uses without hesitation. A word that seems harmless, even comforting. And yet, the moment it appears, tension follows. That word is mine. There is a subtle tightening that happens the instant something is claimed. A shift from openness to defense, from presence to protection. Curiosity stirs here because this tension does not come from loss. It appears before anything has gone wrong. Ownership feels natural, it feels practical, it feels necessary for survival, but beneath that practicality, something sharp hides. The moment something becomes mine, the mind changes its posture. It no longer meets reality. It guards against it. The idea of ownership creates a boundary between self and world. On one side is what is considered me and mine. On the other side is everything else. That division may seem harmless, but it quietly reshapes perception. Once the line is drawn, the mind must defend it. And defense always requires vigilance. Ownership is not just about objects. It extends to people, roles, beliefs, opinions, achievements, and even suffering. The mind claims experiences the same way it claims possessions. This is mine. This defines me. This must not be threatened. And with each claim, inner conflict grows. The violence of ownership is not loud. It does not always look like anger or aggression. Often it looks like worry. It looks like comparison. It looks like resentment. It looks like fear disguised as responsibility. The mind begins to scan for threats that did not exist before the claim was made. Before ownership, there is enjoyment. After ownership, there is anxiety. Before ownership, there is appreciation. After ownership, there is fear of loss. This shift happens so quickly it is rarely noticed. But it changes the entire emotional landscape. When something is labeled mine, the mind creates a story around it. That story includes potential enemies, anyone who might take it, anything that might damage it, any change that could weaken it. Reality itself becomes suspicious. This is how ownership invents conflict. It turns neutral circumstances into threats. It turns other people into competitors. It turns time into an enemy. Aging becomes an attack. Change becomes a betrayal. Uncertainty becomes a danger. The mind believes ownership brings safety, but safety built on possession is fragile. The more something matters, the more fear gathers around it. The mind must constantly defend its territory. Peace becomes conditional. This inner conflict does not require actual loss. It arises from anticipation alone. The thought that something could be taken is enough to create tension. The nervous system responds as if danger is already present. Ownership also reshapes identity. When something is mine, it becomes part of who I think I am. Losing it no longer feels like losing an object. It feels like losing myself. This is where fear intensifies. The mind is no longer protecting something external. It is protecting its image. This is why criticism hurts more when identity is involved, why challenges feel personal, why disagreement feels threatening. Ownership of ideas creates enemies out of differing perspectives. The mind must be right because being wrong feels like annihilation. Even positive traits can become violent when owned. Kindness becomes something to protect rather than express. Wisdom becomes something to defend rather than deepen. Spiritual identity becomes a weapon rather than a path. Ownership demands loyalty from reality. It expects life to cooperate with the story it has built. When reality does not comply, frustration arises. The mind feels betrayed by events that were never obligated to obey. The violence here is subtle but persistent. It is the constant friction between how things are and how the mind insists they should remain. This friction drains energy. It keeps the system in a low-level state of stress. Relationships suffer deeply under ownership. When people are claimed, expectations form, roles harden, freedom shrinks, love becomes conditional. The other person is no longer met as they are, but measured against what they provide. Ownership turns affection into obligation, care into entitlement, presence into duty. And when those expectations are not met, resentment follows. Conflict appears not because love disappeared, but because possession replaced connection. Even self-ownership creates conflict. The idea of my life, my path, my success can trap the mind in comparison. Other people's progress feels like a threat. Their happiness feels like competition. The world becomes a scoreboard. Ownership also feeds scarcity. If something is mine, it implies it is limited. If it is limited, it must be protected. If it must be protected, someone must be kept out. This logic fuels fear, even when resources are abundant. The mind rarely questions this chain of reasoning. It feels instinctual, but it is learned, and what is learned can be unlearned. The Buddha's insight into non-ownership was not about rejecting material life. It was about recognizing how the idea of possession distorts perception. The problem is not having things. The problem is believing they belong to a permanent self. When the sense of mine softens, the mind relaxes. The world stops feeling hostile. Experiences are met without the need to guard them. Enjoyment returns without fear. This does not mean care disappears. It becomes cleaner. When something is no longer owned, it can be cared for without anxiety. Responsibility remains, but obsession fades. Non-ownership also changes how loss is experienced. Loss still hurts, but it does not shatter identity. Grief moves through instead of becoming a permanent wound. The pain is honest, not compounded by the belief that something essential was stolen. The violence of ownership is also visible in how people treat themselves. When failure is owned, shame appears. When success is owned, fear of losing it appears. The mind swings between pride and self-attack, never resting. Letting go of ownership creates neutrality. Experiences are allowed to be what they are without becoming verdicts on worth. Life becomes a series of events rather than a trial. Ownership also fuels comparison. If something is mine, it can be more or less than someone else's. Comparison breeds dissatisfaction. There is always someone with more, someone with less. Peace becomes dependent on relative position. Without ownership, comparison loses relevance. Experiences are no longer ranked. They are simply lived. Satisfaction becomes internal rather than negotiated against others. The idea of mine also locks the mind into time. It demands continuity. It expects the past to guarantee the future. When continuity breaks, anxiety spikes. Non-ownership allows for discontinuity without collapse. The mind often resists this understanding because ownership feels empowering. It feels like control. But true power does not come from possession. It comes from adaptability, from the ability to respond without being threatened. Non-ownership does not mean neglect. It means engagement without domination. It means participating in life without declaring war on change. As the sense of mine loosens, a quiet relief appears. The world feels less heavy. There is less to defend, less to prove, less to protect. Conflict decreases not because the world becomes gentle, but because the mind stops attacking itself through constant defense. Energy once spent guarding dissolves into presence. This presence does not make life smaller, it makes it more fluid. Experiences move freely. Joy comes without fear. Difficulty comes without added resistance. Ownership had promised security, but delivered conflict. Letting go does not create chaos. It creates space. In that space, the mind learns something simple and profound. Nothing needs to be possessed to be meaningful. Nothing needs to be owned to be cared for. And nothing needs to be defended to be lived fully. The quiet tension that once followed the word mine begins to fade. What remains is not emptiness, but ease, a way of being that no longer treats reality as something to conquer, but as something to move within. As the sense of ownership loosens, something delicate begins to surface. When the mind no longer declares war on reality, it becomes aware of a deeper fear that has been quietly shaping behavior all along. Not just the fear of losing things, but the fear of feeling loss itself. The mind realizes that much of its tension was not about what had already disappeared, but about what might one day leave. There is a tender question hidden here. If everything changes, is there a way to meet that truth without closing the heart? Is there a way to enjoy deeply without bracing for pain? This is where letting go before loss happens reveals its quiet wisdom. Most suffering does not come from loss itself. It comes from being emotionally unprepared for it. The mind treats loss like an ambush, something that should not have happened, something unfair, something that breaks the rules. But loss is not an interruption of life, it is one of its rhythms. Letting go before loss happens does not mean withdrawing affection or dulling appreciation. It means loosening the belief that anything must stay in order for life to be meaningful. It is the practice of loving without rehearsing grief and enjoying without demanding permanence. The mind often believes that holding tightly will soften the pain of loss when it arrives. But the opposite is true. The tighter the grip, the sharper the break. Clinging creates shock. Letting go creates continuity. Emotional release before loss happens is not resignation. It is realism infused with care. It is the quiet understanding that everything you touch is already changing and that this does not reduce its value. When you allow yourself to see this clearly, something unexpected happens. Appreciation deepens. Moments become vivid because they are not taken for granted. You stop assuming there will be more later. Presence replaces postponement. Most people delay emotional release because they confuse it with indifference. They believe that if they loosen their attachment, they will care less. But care does not depend on ownership. Care depends on attention, and attention sharpens when fear steps aside. Letting go early means not tying your emotional stability to continuation. It means allowing experiences to be complete without insisting they be permanent. This allows joy to be full rather than anxious. The mind resists this practice because it feels counterintuitive. It asks, if I accept loss now, won't I suffer twice? But acceptance does not create pain. Resistance does. When you accept impermanence, you are not grieving the future, you are respecting reality. Anticipatory release is not pre-grief. It is pre-clarity. It removes the illusion that anything was guaranteed in the first place. When loss eventually occurs, it is still painful, but it is not disorienting. It does not collapse identity. One of the most profound shifts that happens with early letting go is the reduction of fear-based behavior. When you are no longer trying to protect yourself from future pain, you stop making choices rooted in avoidance. You stop shrinking your life to feel safe. Many people unconsciously limit joy because they fear losing it. They hold back from loving fully, from committing deeply, from celebrating openly. Letting go before loss happens removes this hesitation. You give yourself permission to be alive. This practice also changes how memory works. Instead of clinging to the past to preserve what is gone, you allow memories to flow naturally. They become warm rather than sharp. Gratitude replaces longing. The nervous system benefits from this shift. When you stop treating loss as catastrophe, the body relaxes. It no longer stays on constant alert. Emotional resilience increases because the system trusts that pain can be felt without breaking. Letting go early also teaches the mind how to release without collapse. It becomes familiar with the sensation of opening the hand. When loss arrives, the gesture is known. There is less panic, less grasping, less internal violence. This does not make loss easy, nothing does, but it makes loss honest. Pain moves through instead of becoming trapped. Tears flow instead of hardening into bitterness. Another subtle benefit of early letting go is freedom from emotional bargaining. The mind stops negotiating with reality. It no longer promises good behavior in exchange for stability. It stops asking life to stay the same. This frees enormous energy. Energy once spent on fear becomes available for creativity, connection, and care. You show up more fully because you are no longer holding back to protect yourself. Letting go before loss also changes how gratitude is experienced. Gratitude becomes immediate rather than delayed. You stop waiting until something is gone to appreciate it. Appreciation becomes a living practice instead of a retrospective one. This is not a mental trick, it is a way of seeing. When you know something is not owned, you pay attention. You notice textures, tones, small gestures. Life becomes detailed again. Early release also softens regret. When experiences end, there is less sense of unfinished business. You were present. You did not postpone love. You did not assume later. This brings peace even in grief. The mind often fears that letting go will make it passive, but letting go actually sharpens engagement. When you are not clinging, you respond more accurately. You are less distracted by fear and more attuned to what is needed now. This practice also reduces resentment. When loss is accepted as part of life, the mind stops searching for someone to blame. There is sadness, but not hostility. Pain does not turn into bitterness. Letting go before loss happens also dissolves the habit of emotional hoarding. You stop saving love for later. You stop rationing joy. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. This creates a sense of abundance that does not depend on outcomes. Even when things end, life feels full rather than depleted. The fear that early release will numb emotion is unfounded. What numbs emotion is resistance. Allowing impermanence keeps the heart open. The heart closes when it is trying to defend itself. This approach also changes how endings are experienced. Endings become transitions rather than failures. They still carry sadness, but not humiliation, not shame, not collapse. The mind learns that it can survive endings without self-punishment. This confidence reduces fear across all areas of life. You become more willing to try, to love, to risk. Letting go before loss happens also encourages humility. It reminds you that nothing was owed, that every experience was a gift, not a contract. This humility is not smallness, it is grace. As this understanding deepens, you stop asking life to be predictable. You allow it to be alive. You meet moments as visitors rather than possessions. This does not reduce commitment, it purifies it. You commit without demanding control. You care without insisting on permanence. You love without chaining. The quiet strength of this practice lies in its gentleness. It does not require dramatic renunciation. It only asks for honesty. Honesty about change, honesty about fear, honesty about how tightly you are holding. Over time, the habit of early release becomes natural. You notice attachment forming and soften it. You notice fear rising and breathe with it. You do not wait for loss to teach you. This creates emotional maturity. You are no longer surprised by change. You are not shocked by endings. You are not destroyed by loss. What remains is a steady openness, a willingness to be touched by life without needing to trap it, appreciation without anxiety, love without preconditions. The mind grows quieter not because it avoids pain, but because it no longer fights reality. Life continues to move, experiences come and go, and you remain present, responsive, and awake within it all. Letting go before loss happens does not steal meaning from life. It reveals it. As the habit of releasing before loss settles into the body, a quiet misunderstanding often surfaces. The mind begins to wonder whether this softness means becoming distant, whether letting go will slowly turn the heart cold. Many people pause here, afraid that detachment will drain warmth from their relationships and flatten their emotional life. This fear deserves attention because it points directly to the next layer of understanding. There is a deep confusion in modern thinking between detachment and indifference. Indifference closes the heart. Detachment, when understood correctly, does the opposite. It matures the heart. It removes the noise that blocks genuine connection. Detachment as emotional maturity begins with recognizing how much control interferes with intimacy. Control rarely announces itself openly. It hides inside concern, advice, expectations, and subtle pressure. It claims to protect love, but it quietly limits it. When outcomes matter more than presence, connection becomes conditional. Emotional immaturity does not mean lacking feelings. It means being ruled by them. It means reacting instead of responding. It means needing others to behave a certain way in order to feel safe. Detachment interrupts this pattern. It creates space between emotion and action. In that space, choice appears. When you no longer need to control how someone feels, thinks, or grows, you begin to meet them as they are. This meeting is the foundation of intimacy. Intimacy is not closeness created by dependence. It is closeness created by freedom. Many people confuse attachment with depth. They believe intensity equals intimacy. But intensity often comes from fear. Fear of losing, fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough. These fears create emotional spikes, but spikes are not depth. They are instability. Detachment steadies emotional ground. It allows feelings to move without overwhelming the system. You can feel love without panic. You can feel sadness without collapse. You can feel joy without clutching. This stability makes it safer for others to be real with you. When detachment is absent, relationships become negotiations. Each interaction carries hidden conditions. Approval is traded. Security is bargained for. Love becomes something that must be maintained through performance. This creates exhaustion on both sides. Emotional maturity recognizes that no one exists to regulate your inner state. Detachment supports this recognition. It shifts responsibility inward. Instead of asking others to behave in ways that calm your fear, you learn to hold your own emotions with care. This does not reduce connection. It purifies it. When you stop using others to stabilize yourself, you can finally see them clearly. You stop projecting needs onto them. You stop confusing comfort with compatibility. Detachment also removes the urgency that suffocates intimacy. When you are afraid of losing someone, you rush moments. You cling to reassurance. You read meaning into silence. The relationship becomes tight. Detachment loosens this grip. Time slows down. With detachment, listening deepens. You are no longer listening for confirmation or threat. You listen to understand. This alone transforms connection. People feel seen rather than evaluated. Emotional maturity also involves allowing others to experience discomfort without rushing to fix it. Control often masquerades as help. It says, "I can't stand to see you struggle," but underneath is often the truth. "I can't stand how your struggle makes me feel." Detachment allows you to stay present without intervening unnecessarily. This does not mean withholding support. It means offering support without attachment to outcomes. You help because it feels right, not because you need a specific result to feel okay. Detachment changes how conflict is handled. When you are not attached to being right, arguments soften. Defensiveness decreases. You can acknowledge mistakes without losing self-worth. You can disagree without turning the other person into an enemy. Coldness avoids conflict. Detachment engages it calmly. It does not shut down. It stays open without being reactive. This creates safety. Safety allows honesty. Honesty deepens intimacy. Another sign of emotional maturity through detachment is respect for boundaries. Control ignores boundaries. It believes love entitles access. Detachment understands that closeness does not require invasion. It honors space without interpreting it as rejection. This respect allows relationships to breathe. People are more likely to stay when they are not being held hostage by expectations. Freedom strengthens bonds more than obligation ever could. Detachment also dissolves emotional manipulation, both conscious and unconscious. When you are not dependent on specific reactions, you stop using guilt, silence, or intensity to get your needs met. Communication becomes clearer. Needs are expressed directly rather than acted out. The heart remains warm because it is no longer armored. Control hardens the heart. Detachment softens it. It allows vulnerability without collapse. You can open without demanding protection. Emotional maturity also involves accepting that others cannot meet all needs. Control demands completeness. Detachment accepts limitation. This prevents disappointment from turning into resentment. When expectations loosen, appreciation grows. You notice what is offered rather than obsessing over what is missing. Gratitude replaces comparison. Presence replaces evaluation. Detachment also supports emotional consistency. Instead of swinging between closeness and withdrawal, you remain steady. This steadiness builds trust. People feel they can rely on you because your mood is not constantly tied to their behavior. Coldness withdraws to avoid pain. Detachment stays engaged while accepting pain as part of connection. It does not punish others for being human. Another important aspect of emotional maturity is allowing relationships to change form without labeling that change as failure. Control clings to roles. Detachment allows evolution. A connection can shift without being erased. This flexibility reduces heartbreak. You grieve changes without catastrophizing them. You do not force continuity where it no longer fits. Detachment also deepens self-respect. When you are not chasing validation, you choose relationships that align with your values. You do not stay where you must shrink to be accepted. You do not leave simply because discomfort arises. Emotional maturity is the ability to stay without clinging and leave without hatred. Detachment supports both. This maturity also changes how love is expressed. Love becomes an offering, not a demand. You give without keeping score. You receive without obligation. The fear that detachment will make you less caring fades as you experience its effects. You care more cleanly. Without fear, love flows naturally. Without control, affection becomes spacious. Detachment allows deeper intimacy because it removes the pressure to perform. Both people can relax, masks fall away, authenticity emerges. You begin to value honesty over harmony. Harmony maintained through suppression is fragile. Honesty held with detachment is stable. Detachment also reduces emotional burnout. When you are not responsible for managing others' feelings, you conserve energy. This energy can be used for presence, creativity, and care. Emotional maturity recognizes that connection does not mean fusion. Two people can be close without merging identities. Detachment preserves individuality while supporting connection. This balance prevents resentment. When you do not lose yourself in relationships, you do not secretly blame others for your sacrifice. Detachment also improves forgiveness. When you are not attached to how things should have been, you release grudges more easily. Forgiveness becomes a natural response rather than a moral effort. Coldness protects itself by numbing. Detachment protects itself by understanding. One closes doors, the other opens windows. As detachment matures, relationships feel lighter but not shallow. There is room for laughter, silence, disagreement, and change. The connection adapts instead of breaking. The heart does not shrink, it expands. It learns how to love without fear, how to stay open without losing itself, how to be present without trying to control life. This is emotional maturity, not the absence of feeling, but the presence of wisdom within feeling, not distance but clarity, not coldness but warmth that no longer burns. Detachment does not remove intimacy, it makes intimacy possible. As emotional maturity settles in, something gentle begins to happen. Without control, without clinging, without the constant need to secure outcomes, attention starts to soften. The mind is no longer busy managing the future or protecting the past. In that openness, a quiet feeling appears. Not excitement, not relief, gratitude, but not the forced kind. The kind that rises naturally when you realize nothing is promised. There is a subtle surprise here. Many people believe that holding lightly will make life feel less important, less intense, less meaningful. Yet the opposite unfolds. When guarantees disappear, presence sharpens. When permanence is no longer assumed, every moment gains weight. Gratitude does not grow from ownership, it grows from awareness. When something is treated as guaranteed, it fades into the background of attention. The mind stops noticing it. This is not because it lacks value, but because familiarity dulls perception. Holding lightly reverses this dulling. It brings life back into focus. When nothing is guaranteed, the mind stops postponing appreciation. There is no longer an assumption that there will be more later, that this can be enjoyed tomorrow, that connection can be deepened another time. Attention arrives fully because now is all that is known. Holding lightly removes entitlement. Entitlement quietly erodes gratitude. When the mind believes it deserves certain experiences, people or conditions, appreciation turns into expectation. Expectation turns into disappointment. Holding lightly breaks this chain. Without entitlement, experiences feel like gifts rather than obligations. Even ordinary moments regain color. A conversation feels alive. A quiet afternoon feels full. A shared meal feels meaningful, not because anything extraordinary is happening, but because nothing is being taken for granted. Gratitude, sharpened by impermanence, is not sentimental. It is clear. It does not cling. It does not beg moments to stay. It simply recognizes their presence and responds with care. Many people fear that acknowledging impermanence will make joy fragile. They believe that if they remember something could end, they will not relax into it. But what actually makes joy fragile is fear of loss. Holding lightly removes that fear. Joy becomes something that can be experienced fully without the shadow of anxiety. When you stop trying to secure experiences, you stop splitting attention. You are no longer half in the present and half in the future, worrying about preservation. Attention becomes whole. Gratitude grows naturally from wholeness. Holding lightly also changes how memory functions. When experiences end, they are remembered with warmth rather than grasping. You do not cling to memories to compensate for fear. Memories become reflections, not substitutes. This kind of gratitude does not deny sadness. Sadness and gratitude can coexist. In fact, they often deepen each other. When something ends, grief honors the value of what was present. Gratitude does not erase pain, it gives it meaning. When nothing is guaranteed, even difficult moments are met differently. Hard experiences are not dismissed, but they are not wasted. Attention stays open. Learning replaces resentment. Gratitude appears not for the pain itself, but for the clarity it brings. Holding lightly also prevents the mind from numbing itself. When experiences are assumed to be permanent, the mind dulls sensation. It waits. It postpones feeling. When permanence is removed, sensation returns. Life feels textured again. This sharpening of perception makes simple things satisfying. You notice tone of voice, shifts in light, subtle kindness. These details were always present, but they were ignored because attention was busy elsewhere. Gratitude sharpened by uncertainty is active, not passive. It shows up as care. You listen more closely. You respond more thoughtfully. You express appreciation sooner rather than later. You do not save kindness for special occasions. Holding lightly also dissolves comparison. When experiences are not owned, they are not measured against others. You stop asking whether someone else has more, better, or longer-lasting experiences. Gratitude becomes personal rather than competitive. This shift also changes how success is experienced. Achievements are enjoyed without being used as proof of worth. You appreciate effort without demanding recognition. Satisfaction becomes internal. Gratitude deepens because it is no longer transactional. You do not feel grateful because something benefits you. You feel grateful because something exists at all. This removes pressure from life to constantly deliver. Holding lightly also supports humility. When nothing is guaranteed, arrogance fades. You recognize that favorable conditions are not personal achievements alone. This humility does not diminish confidence, it stabilizes it. Another quiet effect of holding lightly is patience. When you are not rushing to secure outcomes, you can wait. You allow processes to unfold. Gratitude includes patience because it trusts timing rather than forcing results. This patience also reduces frustration. When things do not go as planned, the mind does not immediately label the moment as a failure. It stays open. Gratitude for effort replaces obsession with outcome. Holding lightly allows appreciation to exist without attachment. You can enjoy beauty without needing to possess it. You can love without demanding permanence. You can experience joy without fearing its end. This kind of gratitude is resilient. It does not disappear when conditions change. It adapts. When something leaves, gratitude shifts from presence to remembrance without bitterness. Holding lightly also transforms routine. Repetition no longer breeds boredom. It breeds familiarity, infused with attention. You notice variation within sameness. Life stops feeling mechanical. When nothing is guaranteed, even the body is appreciated differently. Sensations are noticed. Health is valued without panic. Aging is acknowledged without despair. Gratitude replaces denial. This perspective also reduces impatience with others. When you understand that nothing is promised, you stop demanding perfection. You become more forgiving. Gratitude for effort replaces criticism for flaws. Holding lightly changes how time is experienced. Time feels less like something slipping away and more like something passing through. You stop chasing moments and start inhabiting them. Gratitude, sharpened by impermanence, also encourages expression. You say what matters sooner. You show appreciation openly. You do not assume there will be another chance. This does not create urgency born of fear. It creates clarity born of awareness. You act because it feels true, not because you are panicking about loss. Holding lightly also frees joy from conditions. Joy no longer depends on how long something lasts. A short moment can be complete. A brief connection can be meaningful. This is why gratitude deepens rather than weakens when certainty is removed. Certainty dulls attention. Uncertainty sharpens it. Gratitude also becomes less performative. You stop trying to feel grateful because you should. Gratitude arises naturally when the mind is present. Holding lightly also softens disappointment. When expectations are loose, outcomes do not crush the heart. Gratitude for effort, learning, and experience remains even when results differ. This allows you to keep engaging with life without becoming cynical. Cynicism often grows from repeated disappointment paired with rigid expectation. Holding lightly dissolves this pattern. Gratitude, sharpened by impermanence, also nurtures contentment. Contentment does not mean settling. It means recognizing sufficiency within the present moment. Holding lightly allows ambition to coexist with gratitude. You strive without resentment. You aim without entitlement. You appreciate progress without demanding completion. As this way of seeing deepens, life feels fuller without being heavier. Moments carry weight, but not burden. Attention stays open. Appreciation stays alive. Gratitude becomes less about saying thank you and more about how you live. It shows up in care, patience, presence, and respect. When nothing is guaranteed, nothing is wasted. Every experience contributes. Every moment matters. Holding lightly does not weaken gratitude. It reveals it. Gratitude was never meant to grow from security. It grows from awareness, and awareness sharpens when the hands are open. As gratitude sharpens and attention stays open, another belief quietly starts to wobble. A belief so familiar, it often goes unquestioned. The idea that stability is something you can achieve and then keep. That if you just arrange life correctly, hold the right things close, and protect what matters, everything will finally settle. This belief feels comforting. It promises rest. But underneath, it carries tension. There is a subtle unease here, because deep down you already know the truth. Nothing has ever stayed still for long, yet the mind keeps trying. Attachment is built on the hope that movement can be stopped, that change can be managed, that life can be fixed into a safe shape. This hope is understandable, but it is also the source of quiet suffering. Life is not designed to hold still. It moves by nature, and when movement is resisted, growth suffocates. Stability, as most people imagine it, is an illusion. It suggests a final state where nothing important shifts, where effort can end, where uncertainty disappears. But life has never offered such a state. Even moments that feel stable are only pauses within motion. The body changes breath by breath. Thoughts rise and fall, relationships evolve, circumstances rearrange. Movement is not a disruption of life, it is life. Attachment tries to deny this. It treats movement as a problem to solve. When something feels good, attachment wants to freeze it. When something feels bad, attachment wants to eliminate it permanently. In both cases, it is fighting the same force: change. This fight creates tension because it asks the impossible. The mind tightens around experiences, roles, identities, and plans, hoping to make them solid. But solidity does not exist in the way attachment imagines. Everything is temporary, fluid, responsive. When attachment freezes life, it does not stop movement. It only stops participation. Growth continues underneath, but the mind becomes rigid. This mismatch creates suffering. Life keeps moving, but the self refuses to move with it. This is why attachment often leads to stagnation, not because life stops offering opportunities, but because the mind refuses to release outdated structures. Old identities linger past their usefulness. Old stories shape new moments. The present is filtered through the past. Growth requires movement. It requires letting go of what no longer fits. Attachment resists this letting go. It confuses familiarity with safety. Even when a situation is painful, attachment may cling simply because it is known. The illusion of stability is especially powerful when things are going well. Comfort makes attachment subtle. It whispers that this arrangement should last, that effort is complete, that vigilance can relax. But beneath that whisper is fear, fear of losing what feels secure. This fear motivates control. Control tries to manage movement. It schedules, plans, predicts, and monitors. Planning itself is not the problem. The problem arises when planning becomes a substitute for trust, when flexibility disappears. Attachment-based stability depends on conditions remaining favorable. When conditions change, anxiety spikes. The mind scrambles to restore the old order. It resists adaptation. This resistance is what suffocates growth. Growth is uncomfortable because it involves uncertainty. It asks you to step beyond what is known. Attachment avoids this discomfort by insisting on sameness. It narrows possibility to preserve familiarity. This narrowing can happen in subtle ways. You stop exploring new interests because the old ones define you. You stop questioning beliefs because they feel like anchors. You stop listening deeply because you already know how things should be. Life responds to this rigidity with pressure. Circumstances shift. Challenges arise, not as punishment, but as correction. When growth is resisted internally, it arrives externally. Attachment interprets this pressure as threat. It doubles down on control. The cycle tightens, stress increases, joy fades. The illusion of stability also distorts time. The mind fixates on maintaining a moment rather than inhabiting it. Presence is sacrificed for preservation. You are no longer living the experience, you are guarding it. This guarding drains vitality. Energy flows when movement is allowed. It stagnates when movement is blocked. Emotional numbness often follows prolonged attachment. Not because life is dull, but because the mind is constricted. Attachment suffocates growth by limiting response. When change occurs, a flexible mind adapts. An attached mind resists. Resistance consumes energy that could have been used for learning, creativity, or connection. This is why attachment often leads to burnout. The effort to keep things the same is exhausting. Life requires constant adjustment. Refusing adjustment creates friction. The illusion of stability also affects self-image. When you attach to who you think you are, growth feels threatening. New interests feel like betrayal. Mistakes feel like identity collapse. Learning becomes risky. A flexible identity allows evolution. An attached identity freezes development. You stay loyal to an outdated version of yourself long after it no longer fits. This freezing is not loyalty. It is fear disguised as consistency. Attachment also interferes with emotional growth. Feelings are meant to move. Sadness passes, joy passes, anger passes. When emotions are suppressed or clung to, they stagnate. Suppressed emotions harden. Clung to emotions overwhelm. Movement allows integration. Feelings are processed by being felt and released. Attachment interrupts this natural cycle. Emotional patterns repeat because they are never allowed to complete. The illusion of stability is often reinforced by culture. Success is framed as arrival. Relationships are framed as permanence. Happiness is framed as a state to reach. These narratives encourage attachment. They imply that movement is failure, but arrival is temporary. Relationships evolve. Happiness fluctuates. When reality contradicts the narrative, disappointment arises. Not because life failed, but because expectations were unrealistic. Attachment freezes not only external circumstances, but inner curiosity. When you believe you have arrived, you stop asking questions. Curiosity fades. Growth slows. Life does not reward stagnation. It invites participation. When participation stops, meaning thins. Movement does not mean chaos. It means responsiveness. Stability does not come from freezing life. It comes from moving with it. Like balance on a bicycle, stability exists only while in motion. Attachment misunderstands this. It tries to create balance by standing still. The result is a fall. True stability is dynamic. It adapts, it bends, it responds. It does not require conditions to remain unchanged. It relies on capacity rather than control. When attachment loosens, movement is no longer threatening. Change becomes information rather than danger. Growth feels natural instead of forced. This shift restores vitality. Energy returns because it is no longer blocked. Creativity awakens. New possibilities appear. Attachment suffocates growth because it clings to outcomes. Growth cares about process. Outcomes shift. Process continues. This is visible in learning. When attached to being competent, mistakes are avoided. Growth stalls. When detached from image, mistakes become teachers. Attachment also limits compassion. When attached to how others should be, their growth feels inconvenient. Detachment allows you to support change rather than resist it. The illusion of stability also creates impatience. Growth takes time. Attachment wants immediate certainty. When progress is slow, frustration rises. Detachment allows patience because it trusts movement. Life's movement is not linear. There are pauses, setbacks, leaps. Attachment expects consistency. Detachment allows rhythm. When movement is allowed, even rest becomes meaningful. Rest is no longer stagnation. It is part of the flow. Attachment tries to turn rest into permanence. It resists re-engagement. Growth requires cycles of rest and action. Freezing disrupts these cycles. The mind often fears that without attachment, life will become unstable. The opposite is true. Without attachment, you stop fighting instability. You learn to move within it. This creates a deeper sense of steadiness. Not the steadiness of things staying the same, but the steadiness of being able to respond. As this understanding settles, the illusion of stability loses its grip. The mind no longer seeks to freeze moments. It allows them to pass. Growth resumes not because you push it, but because you stop blocking it. Life moves. You move with it. And in that movement, something surprising appears. A stability that does not depend on stillness. A stability that breathes. A stability that grows. As movement is no longer resisted and growth begins to breathe again, a new kind of security quietly takes shape. It does not come from fixing life into place or predicting what comes next. It comes from something more subtle, a realization that even when the world feels uncertain, something within you remains available, steady, and untouched. This realization changes how wealth is understood. There is a quiet curiosity here. If nothing outside can be guaranteed, is there something that can be relied on? And if so, what kind of richness does that create? Non-attachment reveals a form of wealth that does not fluctuate with circumstances. While the world measures wealth through accumulation, non-attachment points inward. It shows that the less dependent you are on externals for stability, the richer your inner life becomes. Most people live as if security must come from outside, from income, reputation, relationships, comfort, routine. These things are not wrong, but when they become emotional lifelines, fear enters. Fear of losing them, fear of change, fear of falling behind. This fear quietly drains inner resources. Non-attachment does not reject external things. It simply removes dependence on them. You can have comfort without clinging. You can pursue success without tying your worth to it. You can enjoy relationships without needing them to stabilize your identity. Inner wealth grows when emotional balance no longer depends on conditions, when peace is not rented from circumstances but cultivated within awareness. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means you stop being impoverished by every shift. Dependence on externals creates volatility. When things go well, the mind rises. When they falter, the mind collapses. Non-attachment flattens these extremes, not by numbing emotion, but by grounding it. Inner wealth is resilience, the ability to remain present when conditions change, to adapt without losing yourself, to respond without panic. This resilience cannot be taken away because it is not owned by circumstance. In an uncertain world, this kind of wealth becomes priceless. Markets shift, relationships evolve, health fluctuates, roles dissolve. Non-attachment does not deny these realities. It prepares you to meet them without losing balance. The mind often confuses dependence with care. It believes that relying on externals proves engagement, but dependence weakens care. It turns appreciation into anxiety. Non-attachment frees appreciation. You enjoy without fear of collapse. Inner wealth also appears as freedom from comparison. When value is internal, other people's success does not diminish you. Their progress does not threaten your worth. You are no longer measuring yourself against unstable metrics. Comparison is expensive. It costs peace. It drains energy. Non-attachment eliminates the need to compete for validation. This creates spaciousness. Spaciousness feels rich. Another form of inner wealth is emotional autonomy. You are no longer at the mercy of praise or criticism. Feedback is received without devastation or inflation. This autonomy creates confidence that does not depend on applause. Non-attachment also reduces emotional debt. When you stop expecting life to deliver specific outcomes, disappointment loses its sting. You are less resentful because you are less entitled. Gratitude replaces grievance. Inner wealth includes the ability to rest without guilt. When your worth is not tied to productivity or outcome, rest becomes restorative instead of anxious. You stop proving yourself to invisible judges. This also changes how effort feels. You still work, strive, and engage, but without desperation. Effort becomes expression rather than survival. This makes action sustainable. Non-attachment strengthens discernment. When you are not chasing security through externals, choices become clearer. You are less likely to compromise values for comfort. Integrity becomes easier because fear has less leverage. Inner wealth also shows up as patience. When you are not dependent on immediate results, you can wait. You can allow processes to unfold. This patience reduces stress and improves decision-making. The mind becomes less reactive to uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer signals danger. It signals openness. Possibility replaces threat. This shift alone transforms how life is experienced. Non-attachment also protects against despair. When things fall apart, inner wealth remains accessible. You may grieve, struggle, and feel pain, but you are not empty. Something steady remains. This steadiness is not rigid, it is flexible. It adapts, it responds. It does not demand predictability, it trusts capacity. Inner wealth is also simplicity. When you are not emotionally dependent on many things, life becomes lighter. You need less to feel okay. This does not make life smaller, it makes it more manageable. Simplicity reduces noise. Noise drains attention. Attention is a form of wealth. When attention is free, life feels rich regardless of circumstances. Non-attachment also improves generosity. When you are not hoarding security, sharing becomes natural. You give time, care, and resources without fear of depletion. Giving reinforces abundance. This generosity is not performative, it is grounded. You give because you can, not because you need approval. This creates dignity. Inner wealth includes the ability to face fear without being ruled by it. Fear still arises, but it does not dictate choices. Courage grows not from the absence of fear, but from independence from it. Non-attachment also refines pleasure. Pleasure enjoyed without clinging is cleaner. It does not demand continuation. It does not turn into addiction. You savor without needing more. This protects against excess. Excess often comes from trying to fill inner poverty. When inner wealth is present, moderation becomes natural. Non-attachment also changes how loss is experienced. Loss still hurts, but it does not bankrupt you emotionally. You recover faster because you were not invested beyond capacity. This recovery is not denial, it is resilience. You feel pain without drowning in it. Inner wealth also includes clarity of purpose. When you are not chasing security through status or accumulation, you are freer to pursue what matters. Meaning replaces survival. This clarity reduces confusion. Confusion is expensive. It wastes time and energy. Non-attachment simplifies direction. Non-attachment also deepens trust. Not blind trust in outcomes, but trust in response. You trust your ability to navigate whatever arises. This trust creates calm. Calm is a form of wealth. It allows better thinking, deeper connection, and wiser action. Calm cannot be bought or stolen. Inner wealth also supports gratitude without dependency. You appreciate what you have without fearing its loss. Gratitude becomes stable. This stability makes happiness less fragile. Happiness no longer collapses when conditions change. It adapts. Non-attachment also encourages learning. When failure does not threaten identity, curiosity grows. Mistakes become resources rather than verdicts. Learning increases inner wealth by expanding perspective. Perspective reduces suffering. In an uncertain world, external wealth is always at risk. Inner wealth is portable. It moves with you through change. It is available in any condition. This does not mean you reject external success. It means success no longer defines you. You use it rather than lean on it. Non-attachment also dissolves the fear of not having enough. Enough becomes internal. This sense of sufficiency is deeply stabilizing. Sufficiency does not eliminate desire. It grounds it. You want without needing. You strive without desperation. Inner wealth also allows you to be present during uncertainty rather than distracted by it. You stay engaged with life instead of bracing against it. This presence enhances experience. Even uncertainty becomes interesting rather than threatening. Non-attachment is not withdrawal from the world. It is independence within it. You participate fully without being consumed. The less dependent you are on externals, the more stable your inner world becomes. This stability is not static. It moves with life. In a world that cannot promise certainty, inner wealth becomes the only form of security that does not collapse under pressure. Non-attachment quietly builds that wealth, not through accumulation, but through release. not by controlling life, but by trusting your capacity to meet it. And in that trust, richness appears, not as excess, but as enough. As inner wealth becomes something you can feel rather than chase, another realization quietly settles in. When you stop depending on the outside world to hold you together, a question naturally arises. If so much can change, disappear, or be taken away, what, if anything, actually remains? What is truly yours when everything else moves? There is something steady beneath all the motion, something that does not weaken when circumstances shift. This realization does not arrive loudly. It comes as a quiet relief, a sense that you are not as fragile as you once believed. Much of human fear is built on a misunderstanding of ownership. We assume that what matters most is what we can lose. Money, status, relationships, roles, health, youth. Because these things change, the mind lives in a state of quiet panic. It treats impermanence as theft. But impermanence does not take everything. It only takes what was never fully yours to begin with. What truly belongs to you is not what you possess, but what you have become. Wisdom cannot be taken by circumstance. It grows through experience, reflection, and honesty. Once earned, it does not disappear when conditions change. Even when memory fades or strength weakens, the way wisdom shapes perception remains. It influences how you meet each moment, regardless of what that moment contains. Compassion is another form of inner possession that impermanence cannot touch. Compassion is not dependent on having something. It is an orientation of the heart. When life becomes difficult, compassion often deepens rather than fades. Loss can even refine it, stripping away judgment and replacing it with understanding. Clarity also belongs to this category. Clarity is not knowing what will happen. It is knowing how to relate to what happens. It allows you to see without distortion, to respond without panic, to choose without confusion. Once clarity is cultivated, it does not vanish when circumstances become uncertain. In fact, it becomes more visible. These qualities are not stored in objects, roles, or outcomes. They are integrated into awareness itself. This is why they cannot be lost. They are not things you hold, they are ways you see. The mind often mistakes accumulation for security. It believes that adding more will create safety, but accumulation increases vulnerability. The more you own externally, the more you fear losing. Inner qualities work in the opposite direction. The more you cultivate them, the less fear governs you. Impermanence exposes the difference between what you have and who you are. When something external disappears, there is shock only if identity was built on it. When identity rests on inner qualities, change still hurts, but it does not dismantle the self. Many people discover this truth only after loss. A career ends, a relationship dissolves, health changes, and in the aftermath, something unexpected remains: the ability to care, the ability to learn, the ability to begin again. These capacities were never dependent on circumstances. Wisdom is portable. You carry it through every season of life. It does not require youth, strength, or advantage. It adapts, it learns from each chapter, it grows quieter but deeper over time. Compassion does not diminish when the world becomes harsh. It often becomes more precise. It learns where to open and where to set boundaries. It is not sentimental. It is grounded. Clarity does not guarantee comfort. It guarantees honesty. It allows you to see what is actually happening rather than what fear predicts. This alone reduces suffering. These qualities also compound. Wisdom supports compassion. Compassion refines clarity. Clarity strengthens wisdom. They form a stable inner structure that does not depend on external reinforcement. When you recognize this, fear of loss begins to soften. You still care about what changes. You still grieve what ends. But you no longer feel erased by it. You understand that something essential remains intact, This understanding changes how you relate to success. Success becomes an experience rather than a definition. You enjoy it without using it to prop up identity. When it passes, you do not collapse. It also changes how you relate to failure. Failure becomes information rather than a verdict. It does not destroy self-worth because worth was never outsourced to outcomes. Impermanence stops feeling like a threat when you know what cannot be taken. It becomes a teacher. It clarifies priorities. It strips away what was never essential. The mind often fears emptiness. But what it fears is not emptiness. It fears the loss of false supports. When those supports fall away, what remains is not nothing. It is what was always there beneath the noise. Inner qualities are developed through engagement, not avoidance. Wisdom grows through facing difficulty. Compassion grows through vulnerability. Clarity grows through attention. These processes cannot be undone by external change. This is why non-attachment does not create detachment from life. It creates detachment from illusion, the illusion that identity depends on conditions, the illusion that security comes from permanence. When this illusion dissolves, life feels lighter. Not because nothing matters, but because what matters is no longer at risk in the same way. What truly belongs to you also includes your capacity for presence. Presence cannot be stolen. Even in confinement, illness, or loss, presence remains accessible. It is the simplest and most profound possession. Presence allows you to meet whatever arises without being consumed by it. It anchors experience. It does not require improvement or protection. The mind often overlooks presence because it is too busy protecting symbols of self. When those symbols fall away, presence becomes visible again. Another quality that cannot be lost is integrity. Integrity is alignment between values and action. It does not depend on recognition. It does not require success. It remains available in every circumstance. Integrity creates self-respect. Self-respect stabilizes the inner world. When self-respect is intact, external validation loses power. Courage is also an inner possession that impermanence cannot touch. Courage is not confidence that things will go well. It is willingness to face whatever comes. Courage often strengthens through hardship. Patience belongs here as well. Patience is not passive waiting. It is the ability to remain steady without forcing outcomes. It deepens with time and experience. These qualities form a quiet foundation. They are not flashy. They do not announce themselves, but they carry you through change. The fear that life will take everything is rooted in misunderstanding. Life takes forms, not essence. It takes circumstances, not capacity. When this is seen clearly, attachment loosens naturally. There is less urgency to hoard experiences, less panic about endings, less obsession with control. You still participate, you still care, but you no longer confuse temporary arrangements with permanent identity. This understanding also changes how you view others. You stop defining people by their roles, success, or behavior. You recognize their deeper qualities. This fosters respect and patience. When someone loses status or health, you do not see them as diminished. You see what remains: their humanity, their capacity for care, their awareness. This perspective reduces judgment. Judgment often comes from fear of losing one's own position. When inner worth is stable, comparison loses relevance. What truly belongs to you also includes the lessons you have integrated. Life may repeat patterns, but learning remains. Even if memory fades, the shape of understanding influences behavior. Impermanence may take sharpness of mind, but it cannot take the gentleness that understanding leaves behind. It cannot take the way wisdom softens reactions. This is why elders often carry depth even when abilities decline. Something essential remains. Knowing this allows you to age, change, and adapt without despair. You do not cling to past versions of yourself. You allow evolution. It also changes how you approach the future. You plan without panic. You prepare without obsession. You trust that whatever comes, you bring something valuable to meet it. The belief that you are only as strong as your circumstances creates anxiety. The recognition that strength is internal creates peace. This peace is not denial. It is grounded. It acknowledges loss without turning it into identity. When you understand what cannot be lost, you stop defending yourself so aggressively. Life no longer feels like a constant threat. You can relax your guard. Relaxation does not mean passivity, it means responsiveness. You respond instead of react. This shift restores energy. Energy once spent on fear becomes available for presence, care, and creativity. What truly belongs to you also includes your capacity to begin again. Beginnings do not depend on what you still have. They depend on willingness. Willingness cannot be taken. It is an inner choice. As this understanding deepens, impermanence stops being the enemy. It becomes the context within which what truly matters is revealed. What falls away was never yours to keep. What remains was never at risk. This does not eliminate grief. It transforms it. Grief becomes the honoring of what passed, not the collapse of what remains. Life continues to change. Bodies age, circumstances shift, relationships evolve, but wisdom remains available, compassion remains possible, clarity remains accessible. These are not possessions in the usual sense. They do not belong to the ego. They belong to awareness itself. And awareness, once cultivated, cannot be taken by time, loss, or change. This is the quiet truth beneath non-attachment. You are not empty when things leave. You are revealed. What truly belongs to you has been with you all along. As the understanding of what cannot be lost settles into the body, another attachment quietly asks to be seen. Even when possessions, roles, and circumstances loosen their grip, there is often something deeper that still holds tight, not to what you have, but to who you believe you are. This attachment feels invisible because it has been there for so long. Yet it is one of the strongest sources of suffering. There is a quiet tension in carrying a fixed sense of self, a constant effort to maintain an image, to protect a story, to remain consistent with an idea that once felt useful. This effort rarely rests, and beneath it lives a subtle fear, the fear of not knowing who you are if the story falls away. Identity begins as a practical tool. It helps organize experience. It gives language to memory. It allows communication and belonging. But over time, what began as a reference point hardens into a definition. The mind starts treating identity not as a description, but as a requirement, something that must be defended. When identity becomes fixed, life becomes threatening. Every change feels like a challenge to existence. Growth feels risky. Mistakes feel dangerous. Disagreement feels personal. The mind is no longer responding to events. It is protecting a self-image. This is where suffering intensifies. Not because life is harsh, but because identity is rigid. The need to be someone creates pressure. Pressure to behave consistently. Pressure to meet expectations. Pressure to live up to labels, both internal and external. This pressure narrows the range of possible responses. You are no longer free to change your mind, your direction, or your pace. Detachment from identity does not mean losing personality or memory. It means loosening the belief that you must remain the same in order to be valid. It means allowing identity to be fluid rather than fixed. Most suffering around identity comes from clinging to the past. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is how people know me. When life invites change, the mind resists. It would rather endure discomfort than face uncertainty. Identity clinging often hides inside pride. Pride in being strong, capable, kind, successful, spiritual, independent. These qualities are not problems. The problem arises when they become obligations. When you feel you must always be strong, always capable, always kind, always composed. This creates emotional exhaustion. You are no longer responding to life honestly, you are performing. Detachment from identity allows honesty. You can be strong one moment and tired the next. You can be confident one day and uncertain the next. These shifts are not failures. They are expressions of being alive. Identity also shapes how pain is experienced. When pain contradicts identity, suffering doubles. Someone who identifies as independent may feel ashamed, needing help. Someone who identifies as positive may feel guilty for sadness. Someone who identifies as wise may fear confusion. The pain is not the problem, the resistance is. When identity loosens, pain is allowed to be pain. It is not turned into a verdict on worth. This alone reduces suffering significantly. Identity clinging also fuels comparison. You measure yourself against others to confirm who you think you are. Comparison breeds anxiety because there is always someone who seems more aligned with the ideal. Detachment removes the scoreboard. Without the need to be someone specific, comparison loses relevance. You are not trying to prove anything. You are responding to what is real. The mind often fears that releasing identity will lead to emptiness or confusion. But what actually emerges is flexibility, a capacity to learn, a willingness to adapt. Identity becomes a tool rather than a prison. This flexibility supports growth. Growth requires letting old versions of yourself die. Identity clinging resists this death. It keeps outdated patterns alive long after they have lost relevance. Many people stay in careers, relationships and roles not because they are fulfilling, but because leaving would threaten identity. If I'm not this, who am I? Detachment from identity allows movement without collapse. This does not mean change must be constant. It means change is possible without fear. Identity also shapes how feedback is received. When identity is rigid, feedback feels like attack. When identity is flexible, feedback feels like information. This openness accelerates learning and deepens relationships. Detachment from identity also softens defensiveness. You no longer need to protect an image. You can admit mistakes. You can apologize. You can change course without shame. This creates trust. People feel safer around someone who is not guarding an ego. Conversations become real rather than strategic. Identity clinging also limits compassion toward others. When you are attached to being right, others must be wrong. When you are attached to being good, others must be flawed. Detachment dissolves this polarity. Without a fixed identity to defend, curiosity returns. You can listen without preparing a response. You can learn without feeling diminished. The need to be someone also interferes with presence. The mind is constantly checking whether behavior aligns with identity. Is this on brand? Does this fit who I am? This self-monitoring pulls attention away from the moment. Detachment allows full presence because there is no performance to maintain. You respond naturally. Authenticity emerges without effort. Identity also shapes memory. You remember events selectively to support the story of who you are. Detachment allows memory to be honest. You can acknowledge contradictions without anxiety. This honesty creates coherence, not the coherence of consistency, but the coherence of truth. Detachment from identity also changes how success and failure are experienced. Success is enjoyed without inflation. Failure is faced without collapse. Neither defines you. This stability does not come from certainty, it comes from openness. The mind often confuses identity with meaning. It believes that without a clear self-definition, life will feel meaningless. But meaning does not come from labels, it comes from engagement. When identity loosens, engagement deepens. You are not limited by roles. You can show up in unexpected ways. Creativity expands. Identity clinging also fuels fear of aging. Aging threatens familiar self-images. Detachment allows identity to evolve with the body. You are not trying to preserve youth or relevance. You adapt. This reduces anxiety about time. Time becomes a process rather than an enemy. Detachment from identity also softens grief. When loss occurs, you grieve without turning it into a statement about who you are now. You do not reduce yourself to the loss. This allows recovery without denial. Identity clinging can also trap people in victimhood. Past pain becomes identity. Letting go feels like betrayal of experience. Detachment honors pain without becoming it. You can acknowledge what happened without letting it define what is possible. The practice of releasing identity is gentle. It does not require erasing the self. It asks for curiosity. When a thought arises about who you are, you observe it. You do not obey it automatically. Over time, you see that identity is a pattern of thoughts, not a fixed entity. This insight creates space. In that space, freedom appears. Freedom does not mean chaos, it means responsiveness. You respond to life rather than to self-concepts. This responsiveness allows growth without self-betrayal. You change because life invites change, not because you are running from yourself. Detachment from identity also supports emotional balance. When moods shift, you do not label yourself as broken or weak. You allow the shift. Emotions pass more quickly when they are not personalized. Personalization is expensive. It turns every experience into a referendum on worth. Detachment reduces this cost. Without the need to be someone, you can simply be. Being does not require maintenance. It does not demand consistency. It is alive. This does not erase personality. Personality remains, but it is lighter. It adapts. It evolves. Detachment from identity also encourages humility. You recognize that who you are is not a finished product. This humility invites learning. Learning keeps life fresh. Identity clinging keeps life stale. When identity loosens, the fear of being wrong fades. Wrongness becomes part of learning rather than a threat. This openness strengthens resilience. You are not shattered by contradiction. You integrate it. Detachment from identity also improves compassion toward yourself. You stop punishing yourself for not living up to an image. You allow imperfection. Imperfection is not a flaw. It is evidence of movement. As identity loosens, life feels more spacious. There is less to protect, less to prove, less to maintain. You still act. You still choose. You still care. But you are no longer carrying the weight of a rigid self-definition. Suffering diminishes not because life becomes easy, but because the mind stops demanding that it confirm an image. You are no longer trying to be someone. You are responding to what is. This response is alive. It is honest. It is free. Detachment from identity does not remove you from life. It returns you to it. As the grip on identity loosens, another habit quietly comes into view. Even without trying to be a certain kind of person, there is often a lingering pull toward being seen a certain way. A subtle checking, a quiet hope for approval, a fear of disapproval. This habit is so normalized that it rarely feels optional, yet it carries a heavy cost. There is a tiredness many people carry without realizing why. A background exhaustion that does not come from work or responsibility, but from constant self-adjustment, from monitoring reactions, from shaping words, emotions, and choices to remain acceptable. When identity softens, this performance becomes easier to see, and when it is seen, a new freedom becomes possible. The need for validation is learned early. Approval signals safety. Disapproval signals danger. This wiring makes sense when survival depends on belonging, but over time, the nervous system keeps responding as if acceptance is always at risk. Life becomes a stage. Every interaction becomes an audition. Detachment from approval does not mean rejecting connection. It means releasing the belief that your worth depends on being liked, praised, or agreed with. This belief is what creates the performance. Without it, something quiet and steady takes its place. Validation seeking shapes behavior in countless small ways. You soften opinions, you exaggerate agreement, you hide confusion, you suppress discomfort, you offer what is expected rather than what is true. Each adjustment seems minor, but together they create distance from yourself. This distance is felt as unease, a sense of not fully inhabiting your own life. The body tightens because it is always checking for danger. The mind stays alert for signs of rejection. Rest becomes difficult. Detachment from validation interrupts this cycle. When approval is no longer required for emotional safety, the system relaxes. You stop scanning for cues. Attention returns to the present moment. The quiet freedom here is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It feels like space, space to speak honestly, space to pause, space to not know, space to disagree without hostility. Many people fear that without seeking approval, they will become careless or unkind. But kindness driven by fear is fragile. It disappears under pressure. Detachment allows kindness to be chosen rather than performed. This makes it more reliable. When you no longer need validation, listening improves. You are not listening to be liked. You are listening to understand. This changes conversations. People feel less managed and more met. Detachment from approval also reduces emotional reactivity. Praise no longer inflates the ego. Criticism no longer devastates it. Feedback becomes information rather than identity verdict. This balance creates stability. You can receive input without losing center. You can adjust without collapsing. The need for validation often hides inside achievement. Success becomes proof of worth. Failure becomes shame. Detachment removes this burden. You can strive without tying outcomes to identity. This changes motivation. You work because it matters, not because you need recognition to feel okay. Effort becomes cleaner. Burnout decreases. Validation seeking also fuels comparison. You measure yourself against others to gauge acceptability. This constant measuring is exhausting. Detachment removes the scale. Without the need to rank yourself, other people's success no longer threatens you. Their opinions no longer define you. You become less defensive and more curious. The quiet freedom of not needing validation also appears in silence. You no longer feel compelled to fill space with words. You can sit without performing intelligence or confidence. Silence becomes comfortable. This comfort allows reflection. Reflection deepens understanding. Understanding strengthens clarity. Detachment from approval also supports boundaries. When you do not need to be liked at all costs, you can say no without guilt. You can protect energy without self-attack. Boundaries strengthen relationships. They prevent resentment. They allow honesty. Validation seeking erodes boundaries because it fears rejection. Detachment restores them. This shift also reduces people-pleasing. Pleasing others often comes from fear, not generosity. Detachment allows generosity to be genuine. You give because you choose to, not because you are afraid not to. The body feels this difference. Tension reduces, breathing deepens. The nervous system exits constant alert mode. Detachment from validation also allows you to change your mind. Without needing consistency for approval, learning becomes easier. You can update beliefs without shame. This openness supports growth. Growth requires admitting not knowing. Validation seeking resists this because it wants to appear competent. Detachment values truth over image. The quiet freedom here also includes freedom from self-censorship. You stop editing yourself excessively. You speak more directly. This does not make you harsh. It makes you clear. Clarity reduces misunderstanding. Misunderstanding fuels conflict. Detachment improves communication by reducing hidden agendas. Validation seeking also affects emotional expression. You may hide sadness to appear strong. You may hide joy to avoid envy. Detachment allows emotional honesty without theatrics. Emotions move more freely when they are not managed for effect. This prevents emotional buildup. Feelings pass rather than accumulate. The fear behind validation seeking is often the fear of exclusion. Detachment does not deny this fear, it places it in perspective. Belonging is valuable, but not at the cost of self-erasure. When you stop sacrificing authenticity for acceptance, you attract connections that align naturally. Relationships become fewer but deeper. You are met rather than tolerated. Detachment from approval also changes how you relate to authority. You respect wisdom without surrendering agency. You listen without shrinking. You evaluate without rebellion. This balance creates maturity. You are not defined by approval or opposition. You choose based on values. The need for validation often intensifies during uncertainty. When the future feels unclear, approval feels stabilizing. Detachment offers a different anchor, inner alignment. Inner alignment is knowing why you do what you do. It does not require agreement. It provides steadiness when opinions differ. Detachment from validation also softens self-judgment. When you stop measuring yourself by external reactions, you stop attacking yourself for perceived failures. Compassion increases. Self-compassion supports resilience. You recover faster. You try again. You do not quit because of embarrassment. Validation seeking also affects creativity. Fear of judgment limits expression. Detachment frees creativity. You explore without pre-approval. This freedom allows originality. Originality thrives when approval is not the goal. The quiet freedom here also includes freedom from over-explaining. You stop justifying choices excessively. You trust yourself enough to act without constant defense. This trust strengthens confidence. Confidence becomes grounded rather than performative. Detachment from approval also reduces resentment. When you stop expecting others to validate you, you stop blaming them for not doing so. Responsibility returns inward. This responsibility is empowering. You are no longer dependent on moods, opinions, or reactions. The exhaustion of being acceptable fades. You no longer carry the burden of constant self-monitoring. Life feels lighter. This does not mean you ignore impact. You still care how actions affect others, but care is not confused with fear. Detachment allows responsiveness without submission. You adjust when it aligns with values, not when it is demanded by insecurity. The quiet freedom of not needing validation shows up as ease. Ease in movement, ease in speech, ease in rest. You begin to trust that being yourself is enough, even when misunderstood, even when disagreed with, even when unseen. This trust does not isolate you. It grounds you. It allows genuine connection because you are no longer trading authenticity for acceptance. Relationships become places of meeting rather than proving. Conversations become exchanges rather than performances. Detachment from validation also allows you to stand alone when necessary, not with bitterness but with calm. Solitude becomes restorative rather than lonely. This capacity is essential in a changing world. Opinions shift, norms change, external approval becomes unstable, inner stability becomes essential. The quiet freedom here does not seek attention, it does not announce independence, it simply rests. In that rest, something profound becomes possible. You stop living as a reflection of others' reactions. You live from inner alignment. This alignment does not make you rigid, it makes you responsive without being controlled. Detachment from validation dissolves the exhausting performance of being acceptable. What remains is not indifference but presence, not arrogance but grounded confidence, not isolation but honest connection. The freedom is quiet because it does not need to be seen, it is enough to be felt. As the need for approval fades and the performance finally quiets, attention turns inward and then outward in a new way. With less energy spent shaping yourself for others, you begin to notice something else that has been quietly shaping you. Not opinions, not identities, objects, commitments. the weight of what you own. There is a subtle pressure many people feel but rarely name, a feeling of being busy even when nothing urgent is happening. A sense of mental clutter that does not come from thoughts alone. It comes from responsibility layered on responsibility. Possessions rarely sit still in the background. They ask things of you. They follow you into your thoughts. Owning less is often misunderstood as a lifestyle choice or an aesthetic preference, but at its core, it is about freedom of attention. Every possession carries a silent contract. It requires maintenance, protection, storage, decision-making, and emotional investment. Over time, these contracts accumulate. The mind becomes crowded. The phrase, "I own this," feels empowering at first, but slowly, ownership flips. What you own begins to own pieces of your attention. You remember to fix it. You worry about losing it. You plan around it. You insure it. You upgrade it. You defend it. None of this happens loudly. It happens quietly, continuously. Mental obligations are heavier than physical ones. You can put an object down, but the thought of it lingers. The mind keeps lists. What needs cleaning? What needs replacing? What might break? What others might think? These thoughts consume energy even when you are resting. Possessions multiply decisions. What to wear, what to use, what to keep, what to throw away. Each decision seems small, but together they drain clarity. The mind becomes fatigued by choice. This fatigue does not come from lack of discipline. It comes from excess input. Attention is finite. When it is spread across too many obligations, depth disappears. Presence thins. Owning less is not about rejecting comfort or beauty. It is about choosing which obligations deserve space in your life. When you reduce possessions, you reduce the number of things asking for your attention. This reduction creates relief, not because life becomes empty, but because it becomes manageable. You can fully care for what remains. Possessions also anchor the mind to the past and future. Memories cling to objects, worries attach to them. A simple item can carry regret, guilt, nostalgia, or fear. The object becomes a container for unresolved emotion. Letting go of possessions often releases more than space. It releases stories. Stories about who you were, who you hoped to be, who you felt pressured to become. This is why letting go can feel emotional, even when objects seem trivial. The mind resists this release because it confuses objects with identity. If I let this go, what does it say about me? Detachment reveals that identity was never stored in things, it was projected onto them. Owning less also reduces comparison. Possessions are social signals. They invite judgment, envy, pride, and insecurity. When fewer signals are sent, the mind rests. You are less concerned with how you appear and more connected to how you feel. Possessions also create a sense of obligation to the future. You must earn enough to maintain them. You must protect them. You must keep pace. This obligation can trap people in patterns they have outgrown. Reducing possessions loosens this trap. It creates flexibility. When you need less, you have more options. Change becomes less frightening. Mental space increases when physical space is simplified. This is not magic. It is cause and effect. Fewer inputs create fewer demands. Fewer demands allow attention to settle. When attention settles, clarity improves. You think more clearly, you feel more deeply, you respond more thoughtfully. Possessions can also distract from emotional needs. Buying, collecting, and upgrading can become ways to avoid discomfort. When you own less, these distractions fade. You are left with yourself. This can feel uncomfortable at first, but discomfort is not harm. It is adjustment. Over time, the mind learns that it does not need constant stimulation to feel okay. Owning less also changes your relationship with time. Less time is spent organizing, maintaining, and managing. That time returns to you. You can rest without guilt. You can focus without interruption. Time is one of the most valuable forms of wealth. Possessions often trade time for convenience, but many also quietly steal it back through maintenance and worry. Owning less restores balance. Convenience is chosen intentionally rather than accumulated unconsciously. Possessions can also create emotional attachment loops. The more you invest in something, the harder it is to release it, even when it no longer serves you. This keeps life cluttered. Letting go breaks these loops. It teaches the mind that release is survivable. This lesson extends beyond objects into emotions, roles, and habits. Owning less also encourages gratitude for what remains. When there is less noise, what is present stands out. Quality replaces quantity. This does not require deprivation. It requires discernment. You choose what supports your life rather than what fills it. Mental obligations are often invisible because they are normalized. Everyone seems busy. Everyone seems overwhelmed. But overwhelm is not inevitable. It is often the result of unmanaged accumulation. Reducing possessions is one way to reclaim agency. You choose what deserves space in your mind. Possessions can also tie you to versions of yourself that no longer fit. Objects from past phases linger as reminders of expectations, failures, or pressures. Letting go allows growth. Growth requires space. Without space, new patterns cannot form. Owning less also reduces fear. Fear of damage, fear of theft, fear of loss. Each object adds a small amount of anxiety. Many small anxieties add up. When you own less, there is less to defend. The nervous system relaxes. This relaxation improves health. Stress decreases. Sleep improves. The body responds to simplicity. Owning less also sharpens values. When you choose fewer things, choices become intentional. You ask, does this support my life? Rather than, can I afford it? This question shifts focus from accumulation to alignment. Possessions also shape routines. More items create more steps. More steps create more friction. Simplifying reduces friction. Reduced friction allows flow. Tasks feel easier. Life feels smoother. Owning less does not mean rejecting abundance. It means redefining it. Abundance becomes space, time, clarity, and ease. These forms of abundance cannot be purchased. They are created by reduction. Possessions often promise happiness, but deliver maintenance. When this pattern is seen clearly, desire softens. You no longer expect objects to complete you. This softening frees energy. Energy returns to relationships, creativity, and rest. Owning less also encourages presence. You notice what is here rather than managing what is everywhere. Attention deepens. Presence improves experience. Even simple moments feel rich when attention is undivided. Possessions can also create emotional dependency. Comfort becomes tied to objects. Without them, anxiety rises. Owning less rebuilds emotional resilience. You learn that comfort comes from internal stability rather than external arrangements. This resilience extends to uncertainty. When life changes, you adapt more easily because you are not anchored to many things. Owning less also simplifies decision-making. Fewer options create clarity. Clarity reduces stress. This is not about restriction, it is about focus. Focus allows mastery. You care well for what remains. Possessions often distract from values. Reducing them brings values into view. You live more deliberately. Owning less also changes how you consume information. You become selective. You stop absorbing everything. This reduces mental clutter further. The mind becomes quieter. Thoughts slow. Awareness expands. This quiet is not emptiness. It is readiness. Owning less is not a moral achievement. It is a practical one. It reduces the number of mental obligations you carry. When obligations decrease, freedom increases. Freedom here does not mean escape. It means availability. You are available to life, rather than managing things. As possessions loosen their hold, the mind regains ownership of itself. Attention returns home. What remains is not lack, but room. Room to think, room to feel, room to live without being pulled in too many directions. Owning less is not about what you give up. It is about what you regain, and what you regain is the mind itself. As the weight of possessions loosens and attention returns to its natural clarity, another form of attachment quietly comes into focus, one that is often harder to see than objects or approval. Attachment to people as we wish they were, not as they are. This attachment hides inside love, concern, hope, and responsibility, yet it creates a tension that slowly wears relationships down. There is a subtle ache many people feel in their closest connections, not because love is missing, but because reality is being resisted. A quiet struggle between what is and what should be. This struggle often goes unnoticed, yet it shapes how we listen, react, and care. Letting people be who they are begins with an uncomfortable truth. You cannot control another person's inner world. Their thoughts, emotions, pace of growth, and choices do not belong to you. Even when intentions are good, control slips in through expectation. Detachment in relationships does not mean stepping away or caring less. It means releasing the belief that love gives you the right to shape another person. It means choosing presence over pressure. Control often wears a caring mask. It says, "I just want what's best for you." But underneath is discomfort with uncertainty, fear that if things unfold differently, pain will follow. This fear drives subtle manipulation, advice that is really instruction, support that is really direction. When you resist who someone is, you stop seeing them clearly. You listen for what confirms your expectations rather than what is actually being said. Over time, this creates distance, not because the other person pulls away, but because they are no longer met where they stand. Detachment allows true meeting. You encounter the person as they are now, not as a project in progress. This does not mean you approve of every behavior. It means you stop confusing acceptance with agreement. Acceptance says, "This is what is happening." Control says, "This should not be happening." One opens connection, the other creates friction. Resisting reality in relationships creates exhaustion. You are constantly adjusting, correcting, worrying, and monitoring. The relationship becomes work. Not the healthy work of care, but the draining work of management. Letting go of control does not make you passive, it makes you responsive. You respond to what is real rather than reacting to unmet expectations. Many conflicts do not arise from disagreement, but from resistance. Resistance to how someone feels, resistance to how fast or slow they change, resistance to who they are becoming. When resistance drops, conflict often softens. Conversations shift. There is more curiosity and less defense. You ask instead of assume. Detachment also removes the pressure to fix. When someone you love is struggling, the urge to fix can be overwhelming. But fixing often communicates mistrust. It says, "I don't believe you can handle this." Letting people be does not mean withholding support. It means offering support without trying to control outcomes. You stand beside rather than stand over. This posture strengthens relationships. People feel respected rather than managed. Trust grows naturally. Control also limits emotional honesty. When people sense they must meet expectations to be accepted, they hide parts of themselves. Detachment creates safety for truth. Truth deepens intimacy. Letting people be also requires tolerance for discomfort. Growth is rarely neat. People learn through mistakes. Control tries to smooth the path. Detachment allows the path to unfold. This does not mean you ignore harm. Boundaries remain essential. Letting someone be who they are does not mean allowing abuse or neglect. Detachment supports boundaries because it separates acceptance from tolerance. You can accept that someone is acting in a certain way while still choosing not to engage with that behavior. This clarity reduces guilt and confusion. Detachment also softens disappointment. When you release rigid expectations, people no longer fail as often. You meet reality instead of a fantasy. This reduces resentment. Resentment often comes from unspoken contracts. If I care this much, you should change. Detachment dissolves these contracts. Care is offered freely, not conditionally. Letting people be also changes how love feels. Love becomes spacious. There is room for difference, room for silence, room for change. Attachment wants closeness through sameness. Detachment allows closeness through difference. This difference keeps relationships alive. When people are allowed to evolve, connection stays dynamic. When evolution is resisted, stagnation follows. Control also distorts communication. Advice becomes judgment. Questions become interrogations. Detachment restores neutrality. You speak without hidden agendas. Neutrality does not mean indifference. It means clarity. You are clear about what is yours to manage and what is not. This clarity reduces emotional entanglement. You stop carrying other people's choices as personal burdens. This lightens the heart. Letting people be also protects your own energy. When you stop trying to change others, you reclaim time and attention. That energy can be used for care that actually helps. Many people confuse detachment with withdrawal, but withdrawal avoids engagement. Detachment engages without domination. Detachment says, I am here with you, not I am here to change you. This shift also improves listening. You are not listening for problems to solve. You are listening to understand. Understanding creates connection. Letting people be also challenges the ego. The ego wants to be needed. It wants to be right. It wants to be the source of change. Detachment releases this need. This does not diminish your value. It purifies it. You become supportive rather than controlling. Control also limits empathy. When you believe someone should be different, empathy shuts down. Detachment allows empathy to return. You can feel with someone without trying to steer them. This shared presence is powerful. Often people heal not because they are fixed, but because they are understood. Letting people be also teaches patience. Change happens on its own timeline. Control rushes. Detachment waits. Waiting does not mean doing nothing. It means trusting process. This trust is not naive. It is grounded in reality. Reality unfolds regardless of preference. Detachment aligns with this truth. Relationships also change when you release the need to be understood perfectly. Control wants clarity. Detachment tolerates ambiguity. You may never fully understand another person. Accepting this reduces frustration. Mystery becomes part of connection rather than a problem. Letting people be also reduces fear of loss. When you stop clinging to specific outcomes, relationships feel less fragile. You enjoy what is present without demanding permanence. This enjoyment is cleaner. It does not carry the weight of future anxiety. Control often tries to prevent loss by tightening bonds. Detachment strengthens bonds by allowing freedom. People stay where they are respected. Letting people be also improves self-respect. When you stop over-functioning in relationships, you stop abandoning yourself. Balance returns. You no longer define your worth by your ability to influence others. You rest in your own integrity. This integrity stabilizes relationships. You show up consistently without overextending. Detachment also changes how endings are handled. When relationships shift or end, you grieve without blame. You do not turn change into failure. This allows healing without bitterness. Letting people be also supports forgiveness. When you accept reality, you stop demanding that the past be different. Forgiveness becomes a release rather than a moral duty. Control keeps wounds open by replaying how things should have gone. Detachment allows closure. Relationships are living systems. They breathe, shift, expand, and contract. Control tries to freeze them. Detachment allows movement. This movement keeps relationships alive. Even distance can be held with respect. Letting people be does not mean lowering standards. It means clarifying them. You choose how you engage without trying to reshape others. This clarity reduces confusion. You know when to stay, you know when to step back. You know when to speak and when to listen. Detachment also invites humility. You recognize that your view is partial. Others have inner worlds you cannot fully access. This humility softens certainty. Certainty often fuels conflict. Letting people be also creates emotional safety. Safety does not come from agreement. It comes from respect. Respect says, you are allowed to be yourself, even when it is uncomfortable for me. This respect builds trust. Trust deepens connection. Detachment does not abandon relationships. It abandons illusions about control. When control fades, love becomes simpler. You care without managing. You support without steering. You connect without constricting. This simplicity is not shallow. It is grounded. The tension that once lived between expectation and reality dissolves. What remains is presence. Presence does not require improvement. It requires attention. And attention, when offered without control, becomes one of the most powerful forms of love. As the effort to control others softens and relationships begin to breathe again, another pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Even when intentions are loving, something tight can still live beneath the surface. A constant checking, a quiet worry, a feeling that love must be protected or it will disappear. This is where love slowly transforms into something heavier. Not because love is flawed, but because fear has entered it. There is a familiar tension many people feel in close relationships. A restlessness that does not come from lack of care, but from too much concern. Love feels alive, yet the nervous system stays alert. This alertness is not devotion, it is anxiety, and anxiety, when mixed with love, changes its shape. Love on its own is expansive. It opens attention, it allows curiosity, it trusts connection. But when fear of loss joins it, love contracts. It starts watching, measuring, anticipating danger. What once flowed naturally now requires effort. Attachment is the doorway through which fear enters love. Attachment says, I need this to stay the same for me to be okay. Love says, I am here with you as you are. These two voices cannot coexist peacefully for long. One invites presence, the other demands security. When fear of loss appears, the mind begins to monitor. Words are replayed, silences are analyzed, small changes feel significant. The heart stops resting and starts scanning. This is how surveillance replaces presence. Surveillance is subtle. It does not always look like control. Sometimes it looks like concern. Are you okay? Did something change? Why didn't you respond? These questions can be caring, but when driven by fear, they are not about understanding. They are about reassurance. Reassurance becomes a temporary relief rather than a foundation. It soothes anxiety briefly, but it does not resolve it. The mind quickly looks for the next signal. Love becomes exhausting because it never feels settled. Attachment also turns love into expectation. When fear is present, love begins to carry conditions. Unspoken rules form. You should make me feel secure. You should behave consistently. You should protect my peace. These expectations are rarely discussed, yet they shape reactions. When expectations are unmet, disappointment arises. Not because harm occurred, but because fear feels exposed. The disappointment is not about the other person. It is about the loss of imagined safety. Emotional tension builds here. You want closeness, but closeness feels risky. You want connection, but connection feels fragile. The heart pulls forward while the mind braces for impact. This inner conflict is deeply draining. Love mixed with fear also narrows attention. Instead of seeing the whole person, you focus on behaviors that confirm or threaten security. Warmth becomes conditional. Mood fluctuates based on perceived stability. This fluctuation creates instability. The very thing attachment seeks to prevent begins to emerge. Relationships feel tense because they are being watched. Fear of loss also amplifies imagination. The mind fills gaps with stories. Silence becomes distance. Independence becomes rejection. Change becomes danger. These stories feel real because fear gives them urgency. Attachment does not trust what is happening now. It worries about what might happen next. Love lives in the present. Anxiety lives in the future. When anxiety dominates, love stops feeling safe. Both people sense the tension. One feels watched. The other feels insecure. Neither feels fully at ease. Attachment also changes communication. Conversations become strategic. You choose words carefully to avoid upsetting balance. Honesty feels risky. You may hide feelings to maintain peace or express them explosively when tension builds. Neither pattern supports intimacy. Intimacy requires safety. Safety requires freedom from constant evaluation. Love mixed with fear also struggles with autonomy. When someone you love needs space, fear interprets it as withdrawal. Instead of respecting independence, attachment tightens. This creates pressure. Pressure does not create closeness. It creates resistance. The more pressure is applied, the more distance appears. Attachment then interprets this distance as confirmation of fear, and the cycle deepens. This cycle often repeats without awareness. People believe they are loving deeply, but they are actually managing anxiety. The energy goes into prevention rather than connection. Fear-based love also turns small conflicts into major threats. Disagreements feel dangerous because they suggest instability. Instead of addressing the issue, the mind focuses on preserving the relationship at all costs. This avoidance prevents resolution. Issues remain unresolved. Resentment accumulates. Love becomes tense. Attachment also fuels emotional dependency. When your sense of safety depends on another person's behavior, love becomes fragile. Any shift feels destabilizing. Detachment restores balance. It does not remove love. It removes fear's authority within love. It allows connection without dependency. When fear loosens, love regains its natural qualities. Curiosity returns. Listening deepens. Space becomes safe again. Without fear of loss dominating, you no longer need constant reassurance. Trust grows not because guarantees exist, but because resilience does. Love without anxiety feels lighter, not weaker, lighter. There is room for silence, room for difference, room for change. Attachment also turns love into self-monitoring. You watch yourself closely. Are you too much, not enough, saying the right thing? This self-surveillance pulls attention away from connection. Detachment releases this performance. You show up as you are. Authenticity returns. When love is no longer tied to fear of loss, emotional expression becomes cleaner. You share feelings without using them to secure reassurance. You listen without needing to defend. This clarity reduces misunderstandings. Communication becomes more direct, less charged. Fear-based attachment also creates urgency. You want answers now. You want clarity immediately. You want certainty. This urgency overwhelms the natural rhythm of connection. Detachment allows patience. You trust that not everything needs immediate resolution. This patience reduces tension. Love mixed with fear also struggles with trust. Trust is replaced by checking. Faith is replaced by monitoring. Over time, this erodes intimacy. Trust does not mean certainty. It means openness. Detachment supports openness by removing the demand for control. Attachment also distorts boundaries. You may overstep to reduce anxiety or withdraw to protect yourself. Both responses are reactions to fear. Detachment supports healthy boundaries. You respect space without interpreting it as loss. You stay connected without overreaching. When fear is not driving behavior, love becomes stable. Stability here does not mean sameness. It means emotional steadiness. This steadiness allows growth. People can evolve without threatening the bond. Change becomes part of connection rather than a risk to it. Love without anxiety also changes how you handle uncertainty. You stop treating unknowns as emergencies. You allow relationships to unfold. Unfolding does not mean neglect. It means trust. Attachment also turns love into memory management. Past hurts are stored as warnings. They influence present reactions. Fear keeps old pain alive. Detachment allows healing. Past experiences inform, but do not dominate. Love mixed with fear often leads to emotional bargaining. If I do this, you should do that. These bargains undermine authenticity. Detachment removes transactions. Love becomes an offering, not an exchange. This shift does not remove commitment. It deepens it. Commitment chosen freely is stronger than commitment enforced by fear. Love without anxiety also allows joy to be full. When fear is present, joy is always shadowed by what if. Without fear, joy stands alone. This does not make joy permanent, it makes it complete. Attachment often confuses intensity with depth. Fear creates intensity. Detachment creates depth. Depth is steady. It does not spike and crash. It grows quietly. Love mixed with fear also limits compassion. Fear focuses inward. Detachment opens outward. Compassion flows when you are not consumed by your own insecurity. Detachment does not remove vulnerability. It supports it. Vulnerability without fear is intimacy. Vulnerability with fear is exposure. This difference matters. As attachment loosens, love becomes less about securing the future and more about meeting the present. You stop guarding love and start living it. The anxiety that once accompanied care fades. What remains is warmth without tension. Love does not need fear to survive. Fear does not protect love, it constricts it. When fear steps aside, love regains its natural intelligence. It knows how to adapt. It knows how to endure. Attachment turned love into anxiety by asking it to guarantee what life never promised. Detachment returns love to its rightful place, not as a shield against loss, but as a way of being present while life moves. And in that presence, love finally rests. As love relaxes and anxiety loosens its grip, something unexpected begins to show itself. When fear steps aside, life does not fall apart. In fact, it often does the opposite. Connections soften, moments deepen. What once felt fragile begins to feel strangely steady. This raises a quiet curiosity. Could it be that holding on was never what kept things close? There is a subtle mystery here. The harder something is grasped, the more tense it becomes. The moment pressure is released, ease returns. This pattern appears everywhere, yet the mind resists it. It feels backwards, and still, life keeps proving it true. Releasing is often misunderstood as giving up, but release is not rejection, it is permission. Permission for things to move, breathe, change, and find their natural place. When you stop forcing continuity, continuity sometimes arrives on its own. The paradox is simple but uncomfortable. What you try to hold still often slips away faster. What you allow to move freely often stays longer. This is because tight holding introduces fear. Fear introduces tension. Tension disrupts balance. Balance is what allows things to remain. When you grip something tightly, you signal mistrust. You tell life, I don't believe you will stay unless I force you. That force creates strain. Strain weakens connection. Releasing removes strain. It replaces pressure with openness. Openness creates space. Space allows things to settle naturally. This applies not only to relationships, but to emotions, opportunities, creativity, and even peace. The mind often tries to trap good experiences, afraid they will disappear. In doing so, it squeezes the joy out of them. Joy thrives in freedom. It fades under surveillance. When you allow joy to come and go, it visits more often. When you demand that it stay, it retreats. This paradox appears clearly in human connection. People stay where they are free. They leave where they are controlled. This is not a moral statement. It is a natural response. When someone feels held by expectations, watched by fear, or bound by obligation, the nervous system tightens. Distance becomes a form of relief. When someone feels trusted, respected, and free to be themselves, closeness grows. Staying feels natural rather than forced. Releasing does not guarantee permanence, nothing does, but it creates the conditions where staying is possible. Holding tightly creates conditions where leaving becomes necessary. The mind often believes that control is protection, but control signals danger. It tells the other, I am afraid. Fear is contagious. It spreads tension. Release signals trust. Trust creates safety. Safety invites presence. This is why release often strengthens bonds rather than weakening them. The paradox also applies internally. When you release the need to feel a certain way, emotions move more smoothly. Sadness passes faster when it is allowed. Anxiety softens when it is not resisted. When you cling to emotions, they linger. When you fight them, they harden. When you allow them, they complete their cycle. This is not resignation. It is cooperation with how the mind works. Thoughts behave the same way. The more you try to stop a thought, the louder it becomes. When you allow it without engagement, it fades on its own. Release removes friction. Friction creates heat. Heat creates suffering. This paradox also shapes creativity. Ideas flow when there is freedom. When you try to force inspiration, it disappears. When you allow play, creativity returns. Artists, writers, thinkers often discover this through experience. Effort helps, but pressure kills. Discipline supports creation. Control suffocates it. Releasing outcome allows process. Process is where life happens. The paradox also applies to growth. When you cling to who you think you should be, growth slows. When you release identity, growth accelerates. Growth requires letting go of outdated versions of yourself. Holding on delays evolution. Release invites it. Even confidence follows this pattern. When you try to appear confident, you become tense. When you allow uncertainty, confidence emerges naturally. Confidence is not the absence of doubt. It is comfort with movement. Releasing does not mean you do nothing. It means you act without gripping the result. You engage fully, then let go of how it turns out. This is the difference between effort and attachment. Effort is clean. Attachment is heavy. Effort says, I will do my part. Attachment says, this must work or I am not okay. Life responds better to effort than to demand. The paradox also reshapes how loss is experienced. When you release before loss happens, loss hurts but does not shatter. When you cling until the end, loss feels like collapse. Release builds emotional flexibility. Flexibility absorbs impact. Rigidity breaks. This is why people who practice letting go often recover faster from change. They are not less affected. They are less destroyed. Releasing also improves decision-making. When you are not attached to a single outcome, you see more options. Creativity increases. Fear decreases. Attachment narrows vision. Release widens it. The paradox appears even in physical balance. Tight muscles fall. Relaxed muscles adjust. Balance requires movement, not stiffness. Life mirrors this truth everywhere. The mind struggles with this because release feels like risk. It feels like stepping into uncertainty without armor. But armor restricts movement. Movement is how you stay upright. Release is not passive, it is responsive. You stay engaged, but you stop bracing. This is why releasing often brings relief. The body senses reduced threat. The nervous system settles. When the nervous system settles, connection improves. Communication improves. Perception sharpens. The paradox also affects how time is experienced. When you cling to moments, time feels fast and anxious. When you allow moments to pass, time feels fuller. You stop chasing time, you inhabit it. Releasing also changes how you relate to success. Success enjoyed without attachment feels satisfying. Success clung to becomes stressful. Fear of loss replaces joy. Release allows success to be appreciated without fear. The same is true of failure. When you release identity from outcome, failure becomes information. When you cling to identity, failure becomes shame. Release transforms experience into learning. This paradox also influences trust. Trust cannot be forced. The more you demand it, the less it appears. When you release control, trust grows naturally. Trust requires space. Attachment closes space. Releasing does not mean you stop caring, it means you stop controlling. Care remains, control dissolves. This distinction is crucial. Many people avoid release because they fear losing care. But care without control is purer. It does not need to manipulate. Release also improves honesty. When you are not trying to keep something at all costs, you speak more truthfully. Truth strengthens connection. Attachment encourages silence and performance. Release encourages authenticity. The paradox shows up in happiness as well. When you chase happiness, it slips away. When you allow moments of contentment, happiness appears quietly. Happiness resists pursuit. It responds to presence. Release creates presence. Attachment creates pursuit. The mind often argues that release is irresponsible, but release is not neglect. It is realism. You acknowledge what you can influence and what you cannot. This clarity prevents wasted energy. Energy returns to what is actually possible. The paradox also affects patience. When you release urgency, things unfold more smoothly. When you rush, you create resistance. Resistance slows progress. Release aligns timing. This does not mean waiting passively, it means acting without panic. Releasing also softens fear of endings. When you allow things to come and go, endings feel less catastrophic. You have practiced letting go. Practice builds skill. Skill builds confidence. The paradox also reshapes attachment to meaning. When you try to define meaning tightly, life feels rigid. When you allow meaning to evolve, life feels rich. Meaning grows through experience, not control. Release also supports compassion. When you release expectations of others, compassion flows. When you cling to how others should be, judgment rises. Compassion strengthens bonds. Judgment weakens them. The paradox is especially visible in parenting, leadership, and care. Guidance without control supports growth. Control without trust creates rebellion. Releasing allows others to find their own balance. The mind often fears that release will lead to chaos. But chaos often comes from resistance. When systems are allowed to self-adjust, balance returns. Nature demonstrates this constantly. Water flows around obstacles. It does not force its way through, and because it flows, it endures. Human life follows the same principle. Release is not weakness, it is alignment with reality. The paradox remains uncomfortable because it asks you to trust something beyond control, but every time you release and notice that life continues, trust grows. Trust is built through experience, not belief. As you practice releasing small things, larger releases become possible. Confidence grows quietly. You begin to see that staying does not come from gripping, it comes from fit. Things stay where they belong. When you release, you allow fit to reveal itself. What stays after release is what was never dependent on force. This understanding changes how you hold everything. Relationships, plans, identities, even life itself. You hold lightly, not because you do not care, but because you understand. And in that understanding, something surprising happens. What is allowed to come and go naturally often stays longer than what is tightly held, not because you demanded it, but because it was free. As the understanding of release settles more deeply, something becomes clear. Letting go was never about pushing life away. It was about moving with it. This is where detachment is often misunderstood and where its real purpose finally reveals itself. Detachment is not an escape from change, it is an alignment with it. There is a quiet discomfort many people carry when they hear the word impermanence. It sounds like loss, like instability, like something to tolerate rather than understand. Yet impermanence is not a threat. It is the basic condition of being alive. The problem has never been that things change. The problem has been the expectation that they should not. Expectation creates friction. Friction creates suffering. When the mind expects permanence, every shift feels like a violation. Aging feels unfair. Endings feel cruel. Uncertainty feels dangerous. Detachment removes this expectation, not by numbing the heart, but by educating it. Alignment with impermanence begins when you stop treating change as an interruption and start recognizing it as continuity. Nothing is breaking the flow of life. Life is the flow. Suffering arises when the mind insists on stillness in a moving world. It asks reality to pause, to repeat, to remain loyal to a moment. Reality does not refuse out of cruelty. It simply continues. Detachment does not ask you to like change. It asks you to stop arguing with it. When you align with impermanence, you stop wasting energy on resistance. That energy becomes available for presence. Presence does not eliminate pain, but it prevents pain from turning into suffering. Pain is unavoidable. Suffering is optional. This distinction is subtle but powerful. Pain comes from loss, disappointment, limitation, and uncertainty. Suffering comes from the belief that these should not be happening. Detachment removes the belief. When you expect change, change stops shocking you. It still affects you, but it does not disorient you. You are not betrayed by reality because you were never promised permanence. Alignment with impermanence also changes how you experience stability. Stability is no longer defined as things staying the same. It is defined as your ability to remain present while things change. This is a profound shift. It moves stability from the outside to the inside. Most anxiety comes from a mismatch between expectation and reality. You expect continuity. Reality offers movement. Anxiety is the tension between the two. Detachment dissolves this tension by bringing expectation back into alignment with truth. Truth is simple. Everything changes. Bodies age, feelings shift, relationships evolve, circumstances rearrange, thoughts arise and dissolve. This is not a philosophical idea, it is direct experience. Yet the mind resists this experience by clinging to snapshots. It wants moments to become monuments. Detachment allows moments to remain moments. This does not reduce meaning, it restores it. Meaning does not come from permanence, it comes from participation. Alignment with impermanence also softens fear of the future. When change is expected, uncertainty becomes normal rather than alarming. You stop treating unknowns as emergencies. This normalizing of uncertainty calms the nervous system. The body stops bracing for disaster. Breath deepens. Attention widens. Detachment also changes how you relate to the past. When impermanence is accepted, the past is no longer a reference point for how things should be now. Memory becomes informative rather than binding. You learn from the past without trying to preserve it. This allows growth. Growth requires releasing what no longer fits. Impermanence makes growth possible. Resisting impermanence freezes development. You stay loyal to outdated structures. Alignment allows evolution. Detachment also clarifies grief. Grief is the response to change. Suffering is the response to resisting that change. When you align with impermanence, grief moves cleanly. It does not turn into bitterness. Bitterness arises when loss is interpreted as injustice. Alignment removes that interpretation. This does not make loss pleasant, it makes it honest. Alignment with impermanence also reshapes how you approach goals. Goals are no longer guarantees of future satisfaction. They are directions of movement. You pursue without demanding arrival. This prevents disappointment from turning into despair. You adjust rather than collapse. Detachment also dissolves the fantasy of control. Control is an attempt to override impermanence. It creates tension because it is always partial. Alignment recognizes limits. It works within them. Limits are not failures. They are features of reality. When you accept limits, you stop fighting what cannot be changed. This frees energy for what can be influenced. Detachment does not eliminate effort, it purifies it. You act without illusion. You plan without attachment. You respond without panic. Alignment with impermanence also changes how you experience pleasure. Pleasure, enjoyed with awareness of change, is richer. You savor without clinging. You do not demand continuation. This removes the anxiety that shadows pleasure when permanence is expected. Detachment allows pleasure to be complete even when brief. The mind often believes that accepting impermanence will make life feel unstable. The opposite happens. Life feels more trustworthy because it behaves as expected. Expectation aligns with experience. Tension dissolves. Alignment also supports patience. When you understand that everything unfolds in time, you stop rushing moments. You allow processes to mature. Rushing is often an attempt to escape uncertainty. Alignment makes waiting tolerable. Detachment also transforms disappointment. Disappointment is the gap between expectation and outcome. When expectation is realistic, disappointment softens. This does not remove preference. You can still want things to go well. You simply do not require them to. This distinction preserves hope without creating dependency. Alignment with impermanence also improves emotional regulation. Emotions are movements. When allowed to move, they pass. When resisted, they intensify. Detachment allows emotional weather to change without panic. You stop labeling emotions as problems. You experience them as information. This reduces internal conflict. Detachment also changes how you relate to others. When people evolve, you do not interpret it as loss of stability. You adjust. This flexibility supports long-term connection. Alignment with impermanence also reframes aging. Aging is not decline, it is transformation. Resisting it creates suffering. Aligning with it creates dignity. You work with your body rather than against it. Detachment also influences how you experience uncertainty in the world. Economic shifts, cultural changes, global events. When impermanence is expected, uncertainty does not collapse your inner world. You stay informed without being consumed. This resilience is essential in a changing world. Alignment with impermanence also dissolves nostalgia's grip. Nostalgia becomes appreciation rather than longing. You remember without wishing to return. This frees you to live forward. Detachment also reduces regret. Regret often comes from clinging to how things should have been. Alignment allows you to accept what was without trying to rewrite it. Acceptance restores energy to the present. Alignment with impermanence also supports forgiveness. Forgiveness is easier when you stop expecting the past to be different. You accept that people acted within conditions that no longer exist. This understanding softens judgment. Detachment does not remove responsibility. It clarifies it. You are responsible for how you respond now, not for freezing the past. Alignment with impermanence also changes how you experience meaning. Meaning is no longer tied to permanence. It is tied to presence and participation. You stop asking life to last forever to matter. This frees you to engage fully without fear. Detachment also reduces existential anxiety. Fear of death often comes from clinging to permanence. Alignment with impermanence allows you to live fully without demanding immortality. This does not erase fear completely. It places it in context. Alignment with impermanence also encourages humility. You recognize that you are part of a larger process. This reduces ego-driven struggle. Humility does not diminish worth, it grounds it. Detachment allows you to meet life honestly, without fantasy, without denial, without escape. Escape avoids impermanence. Alignment embraces it. This embrace is not dramatic, it is quiet. It shows up as reduced resistance, increased flexibility, and deeper presence. Life continues to change. That will not stop. What can stop is the inner battle against that change. Detachment ends the battle. When you stop expecting things not to change, suffering loosens its grip, pain still visits, loss still happens, but the added layer of mental resistance fades. This is not resignation, it is cooperation. Cooperation with reality creates peace. Peace does not require stillness, it requires alignment. Alignment with impermanence is not a technique, it is a way of seeing. When you see clearly, effort reduces, the mind rests. And in that rest, life does not shrink, it expands. Not because it stays the same, but because you finally move with it. As alignment with impermanence settles into understanding, attention naturally turns backward. Not out of longing, but because something unresolved often waits there. Even when the present feels calmer, the mind has a habit of returning to old scenes, replaying moments, and whispering familiar questions. What if I had chosen differently? What if I had known then what I know now? This quiet pull toward the past can drain more energy than any future worry. There is a particular heaviness that comes from unfinished inner conversations, a sense that something is still owed to a moment that no longer exists. This is where regret lives, and this is where detachment begins to offer its most gentle relief. Regret is not simply memory. It is attachment to an alternate version of reality. It is the belief that the past should have unfolded differently, and that because it did not, something essential was lost forever. This belief keeps the mind turned backward, investing energy in scenes that cannot respond. Detachment dissolves regret, not by erasing memory, but by releasing the demand that the past be rewritten. It recognizes a simple truth: what happened already belongs to impermanence. Clinging to it does not change it. It only steals from now. Most regret is fueled by hindsight. The mind looks back with information that was not available at the time and judges past decisions by present awareness. This creates an unfair standard. You punish a former version of yourself for not knowing what only time could teach. Detachment restores fairness. It allows you to see past choices in their true context. You acted with the understanding, resources, and emotional capacity you had then. Expecting more is not wisdom, it is cruelty. Regret also often confuses responsibility with blame. Responsibility means learning. Blame means staying stuck. Detachment keeps the lesson and releases the punishment. When attachment to what should have been loosens, memory becomes informative rather than accusatory. You can reflect without reliving. You can remember without reopening wounds. This shift releases enormous energy. Energy that was trapped in mental replay returns to the present moment. Attention comes back online. Life feels available again. Regret keeps the nervous system activated. Each replay signals unfinished business. The body responds as if action is still required. Detachment signals completion. It tells the system that the moment has passed. Completion does not mean approval. It means acceptance. Acceptance is the end of internal struggle. Many people believe that holding on to regret proves accountability or depth. But regret that does not transform into insight is not depth, it is stagnation. Detachment allows insight to remain while regret dissolves. You keep the understanding. You release the self-attack. Regret also narrows identity. You begin to define yourself by mistakes. I am the person who failed. I am the person who missed the chance. Detachment frees identity from single moments. You are not a moment, you are a process. When detachment loosens regret, the past no longer defines the present. It informs it. This difference matters. The mind often resists letting go of regret because it fears repeating mistakes. It believes regret is protection, but awareness protects better than punishment. Learning does not require suffering to continue. Detachment trusts learning. It trusts that insight has already been integrated. Regret also feeds comparison with imaginary timelines. You imagine a version of your life that could have been better, happier, more successful. This imagined life becomes a source of quiet dissatisfaction. Detachment dissolves this comparison by grounding attention in reality. Reality is the only place action is possible. Imagined lives cannot be lived. Only this one can. Regret often disguises grief. Grief for opportunities that passed, for relationships that ended, for versions of yourself that never came to be. Detachment allows grief without fixation. Grief moves when allowed. Regret keeps it frozen. Detachment does not rush grief. It allows it to complete. Completion restores energy. Another source of regret is moral perfectionism, the belief that you should have always known the right thing to do. This belief ignores human complexity. Detachment replaces perfectionism with compassion. Compassion does not excuse harm. It contextualizes it. It allows repair without endless self-punishment. Detachment also softens regret about inaction, the chances not taken, the words not spoken, the risks avoided. These regrets often carry shame. Detachment reframes them as information. You learn what matters. You learn where fear held you back. This learning informs future courage. The past cannot be changed, but the relationship to the past can. Regret consumes attention by demanding resolution where none is possible. Detachment ends the demand. Peace follows. When regret loosens, presence deepens. You notice what is happening now instead of comparing it to what might have been. Presence restores vitality. Life feels immediate again. Detachment also changes how memory is experienced emotionally. Memories lose their sharp edges. They become stories rather than wounds. This does not mean forgetting. It means integration. Integrated memories no longer pull you backward. They sit quietly in awareness. Regret often includes the belief that a single decision ruined everything. This belief exaggerates causality. Life is shaped by countless factors. Detachment restores proportion. No single moment carries that much power. Detachment also dissolves regret rooted in other people's actions. You stop expecting the past to conform to your wishes. You accept that others acted from their own limitations. This acceptance does not condone harm. It releases you from carrying it indefinitely. Regret often comes with rumination, endless thinking that produces no new insight. Detachment interrupts rumination by disengaging from its purpose. The purpose of rumination is control after the fact, control that is impossible. When control is released, thinking quiets. Detachment also returns agency. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen?" you begin asking, "How will I live now?" This question reclaims power. Regret steals agency by anchoring identity in the past. Detachment returns agency by grounding identity in the present. Regret also limits imagination. When the mind is stuck correcting the past, it cannot envision new possibilities. Detachment frees imagination. Imagination directed forward is creative. Directed backward, it is destructive. Detachment redirects imagination toward what can still be shaped. Regret can also attach to perceived wasted time, years spent in the wrong job, relationship, or mindset. Detachment reframes these years as preparation rather than loss. Nothing lived is wasted if it teaches. Detachment allows you to harvest meaning from experience rather than mourn its cost. This harvest feeds wisdom. Wisdom strengthens presence. Regret also fuels fear of future mistakes. You become hesitant, overcautious. Detachment restores trust in your ability to respond. You cannot guarantee perfect choices. You can trust your capacity to adapt. This trust reduces anxiety. Anxiety thrives on the belief that mistakes are fatal. Detachment disproves this belief. Detachment also softens regret tied to identity change. I used to be different. I should still be that person. Detachment allows identity to evolve without nostalgia. Change becomes growth rather than loss. Regret often comes from believing you missed your only chance. Detachment recognizes that life offers many openings, not just one. Opportunities change shape. They do not disappear completely. Detachment dissolves the myth of the single correct path. There are many paths. Each teaches something different. Regret clings to one imagined path. Detachment embraces multiplicity. This embrace reduces pressure. You stop living as if every choice must be perfect. Detachment also changes how apologies are experienced. You can apologize sincerely without remaining trapped in guilt. Guilt transforms into responsibility. Responsibility looks forward. Guilt looks backward. Detachment supports repair. Repair heals relationships and the self. Regret often isolates. It keeps you alone with your thoughts. Detachment reconnects you to life. When you stop arguing with the past, the present welcomes you back. Energy returns, curiosity returns, engagement returns. Detachment also improves forgiveness of self. Self-forgiveness is not forgetting, it is releasing the need to punish. Punishment does not improve the past, it only darkens the present. Detachment ends the punishment. This ending creates relief. Relief creates openness. Openness allows life to flow again. Regret fades not because the past changes, but because your relationship to it does. The past becomes complete. Completion frees attention. Attention returns to now, and in the present moment, something becomes clear. Life did not wait while you were looking back. It has been here all along, ready to be lived. Detachment restores you to it. As the weight of regret loosens and the mind returns more fully to the present, another layer of attachment quietly reveals itself. It is more subtle than clinging to the past and harder to notice than fear of loss. It hides behind good intentions, strong emotions, and even the desire to love deeply. This is the attachment that does not protect connection, but protects an image of the self. There is a quiet discomfort in realizing this. The possibility that what feels like love, loyalty, or care may sometimes be driven by something else. Not cruelty, not selfishness in the obvious sense, but ego operating softly, wearing the mask of emotion. Emotional clinging often looks sincere. It feels intense, it feels personal, but intensity does not guarantee authenticity. Sometimes it signals insecurity, trying to preserve a story about who you are. The ego does not always shout. Often it whispers. It does not always demand attention. Sometimes it asks for reassurance. It wants to be seen as important, needed, irreplaceable, good, right, or special. Emotional attachment can become the tool it uses to protect these identities. Attachment becomes ego-driven when the relationship serves as a mirror more than a meeting, when the primary concern shifts from connection to confirmation, from being with someone to being validated by them. This shift is subtle, it happens quietly. You begin to care not just about the person, but about what the relationship says about you, your worth, your role, your image. When attachment protects self-image, reactions intensify. Disagreement feels threatening, distance feels personal, change feels like rejection. These reactions are not about losing connection. They are about losing identity. The ego fears invisibility. It fears being ordinary. It fears being wrong. Emotional clinging reassures the ego that it matters, that it is central, that it is secure. This is why attachment often becomes strongest when self-image feels fragile. During uncertainty, transition, or loss of role, emotional clinging increases. The ego looks for something to hold on to, something to stabilize the sense of self. In these moments, attachment is not about love, it is about grounding identity. This is not a moral failure, it is a human pattern. But when left unseen, it distorts connection. When ego is involved, listening changes. You listen not to understand, but to confirm your role. Are you appreciated, needed, acknowledged? When these confirmations are missing, discomfort arises. The discomfort is often misinterpreted. It feels like relational insecurity, but it is identity insecurity. Attachment driven by ego often demands reassurance, not because love is lacking, but because self-image feels unstable. The reassurance temporarily soothes, but it does not resolve the underlying need. This creates a cycle. The more reassurance is sought, the more fragile self-image becomes. Dependence grows, anxiety increases. Genuine connection does not require constant confirmation. Ego-driven attachment does. Another sign of ego behind clinging is the need to be indispensable. When attachment is healthy, you want the other to be well, even if that means independence. When ego is involved, independence feels threatening. You may say you want the other to grow, but feel uneasy when they do. This unease reveals attachment to a role rather than to the person. Roles feed ego: caretaker, protector, advisor, the one who understands. These roles are not wrong, but when identity is fused with them, attachment forms. When someone no longer needs you in the same way, ego interprets it as loss of value. Emotional clinging intensifies, not to preserve connection, but to preserve relevance. This is why attachment often shows up as subtle control: advice given when not asked, help offered when not needed, concern expressed repeatedly. These actions can look loving, but they often protect identity. Control reassures ego that it still matters. Genuine connection does not need control. It respects autonomy. Ego-driven attachment struggles with this. The ego also attaches to being right. Emotional clinging can form around shared beliefs, values, or narratives. When these are challenged, attachment reacts strongly. Not because connection is threatened, but because self-image is. You are no longer defending an idea. You are defending who you think you are. This is why some emotional conflicts escalate quickly. The stakes feel high because identity feels at risk. Attachment protects ego by narrowing perspective. You become less curious, less open. You cling to familiar interpretations. This limits growth. Growth threatens ego because it requires letting go of certainty. Attachment resists this. It prefers stability over truth. When ego is involved, emotional reactions feel justified. You tell yourself you are reacting because you care, but caring does not require rigidity. Ego does. Another sign of ego behind attachment is comparison. You compare how much you give versus how much you receive, how much you care versus how much the other seems to care. These comparisons fuel resentment. Resentment is often ego hurt by unmet expectations. Genuine connection does not keep score. Ego-driven attachment does. Attachment also protects ego by avoiding vulnerability. You may cling emotionally while avoiding honest exposure. You want closeness, but only on terms that preserve your image. This creates a strange tension: intensity without intimacy, emotion without openness. Detachment allows vulnerability because it does not need to defend self-image. Ego resists vulnerability because it fears exposure. When ego is driving attachment, apologies become difficult. Admitting fault threatens identity. Emotional clinging then shows up as justification, defensiveness, or blame. Connection suffers because honesty is sacrificed for self-protection. Detachment dissolves this pattern by separating worth from image. You can be wrong without being diminished. You can be imperfect without being unlovable. This separation weakens ego's grip. Attachment softens. Ego-driven attachment also fears abandonment intensely, not just loss of connection, but loss of identity. Who am I if I am not needed, chosen, admired? This fear fuels anxiety. Anxiety fuels clinging. Detachment addresses this at the root. It reveals that identity does not depend on emotional roles. You exist without performance. When this is seen, attachment relaxes. The ego also clings to emotional narratives, stories of sacrifice, loyalty, endurance. These stories reinforce identity. Letting go feels like erasing meaning. Detachment does not erase meaning. It releases the need to define yourself by suffering. You can honor what you gave without clinging to the role of giver. Ego-driven attachment often keeps old patterns alive. Even when relationships change, the ego wants to preserve familiar dynamics. It resists renegotiation. Detachment allows relationships to evolve without identity collapse. Another subtle sign of ego behind attachment is emotional dramatization. Feelings are amplified. Conflicts feel larger than they are. This dramatization keeps the ego central. Drama maintains significance. Detachment removes the need for significance. This does not make life flat. It makes it grounded. Genuine connection thrives in simplicity. Ego thrives in intensity. Detachment reveals this difference. You begin to notice when emotional reactions are about connection and when they are about image. This noticing creates space. In that space, choice appears. You can choose to respond rather than react, to listen rather than defend, to release rather than cling. Ego resists release because release feels like diminishment. But release actually expands capacity. When you stop protecting self-image, you become more available, more present, more responsive. Connection deepens because there is less agenda. Detachment also reduces emotional exhaustion. When you are no longer maintaining an image, energy returns. You stop managing perception. This energy supports genuine care, care without self-reference. Ego-driven attachment often confuses being needed with being loved. Detachment clarifies the difference. Love does not require dependency. Ego prefers it. When dependency fades, love becomes lighter, not weaker, lighter. Detachment does not remove emotion, it removes distortion. Emotions become signals rather than strategies. They inform rather than manipulate. This clarity improves relationships. Conflicts are addressed directly. Needs are expressed honestly. Boundaries are respected. Ego-driven attachment resists boundaries. Boundaries limit access to validation. Detachment welcomes boundaries. They protect clarity. Another ego pattern behind attachment is fear of being replaced. This fear is rooted in comparison and scarcity. Detachment dissolves scarcity by grounding worth internally. When worth is internal, replacement loses meaning. Connection becomes about fit rather than competition. Detachment also weakens jealousy. Jealousy often protects ego status. When status is irrelevant, jealousy fades. This does not mean you stop caring, it means you stop ranking. Ego-driven attachment often seeks exclusivity to secure identity. Detachment allows openness without fear. This openness strengthens trust. Trust deepens connection. Detachment also changes how endings are experienced. When ego is attached, endings feel humiliating. When detachment is present, endings feel sad but dignified. You grieve without self-rejection. This dignity comes from separating self-worth from relational outcomes. Ego-driven attachment also clings to narratives of being misunderstood. These narratives protect self-image. Detachment invites reflection. Reflection may reveal blind spots. Ego resists this. Detachment welcomes it. Welcoming insight allows growth. Growth reduces attachment. The ego fears irrelevance. Detachment reveals that relevance is not something you must secure. It emerges naturally when you are present. Presence is not an image. It is an experience. When ego steps back, presence steps forward. This presence allows genuine connection. Connection not based on roles, validation, or image. Attachment that protects ego slowly dissolves when self-image no longer needs defense. You still care, you still feel, but you do not cling. You meet others without needing to be someone special to them. This meeting is honest, it is equal, it is alive. Detachment does not strip away humanity, it reveals it. When ego is no longer steering attachment, connection becomes simpler, quieter, more real. You are no longer holding on to be seen, you are present to see. And in that presence, genuine connection finally has room to exist. As ego loosens its grip and attachment no longer needs to protect an image, something important becomes possible. Reactions slow down. The inner noise that once rushed to defend, explain, or secure begins to quiet. In that quiet, a different quality of presence emerges. Not withdrawal, not distance, reliability. There is a common misunderstanding that detachment makes people less committed. less caring, or less dependable. It can look that way from the outside because detachment removes urgency. But urgency was never the same as reliability. In fact, urgency often undermines it. When fear drives behavior, responses are fast but unstable. When fear loosens, responses become slower but clearer. This is where true reliability lives. Reliability is not about always saying yes. It is not about reacting quickly. It is not about intensity. Reliability is about consistency of presence, about responding from clarity rather than impulse. Fear-based attachment creates reactivity. Reactivity feels like engagement, but it is actually a loss of choice. The nervous system hijacks behavior. Words are spoken to reduce anxiety, not to communicate truth. Actions are taken to restore comfort, not to serve what is needed. Detachment interrupts this pattern. It creates a pause between stimulus and response. In that pause, intelligence appears. A person who is not ruled by fear does not disappear in moments of stress. They do not become unpredictable. They do not escalate or withdraw impulsively. They stay. Staying is reliability. Fear pulls people away from the present moment. It pushes them into defense, explanation, or control. Detachment brings them back to what is actually happening. When someone is detached, they are not numb. They are grounded. Their nervous system is not constantly signaling threat. This allows perception to remain accurate. Accurate perception is the foundation of reliability. When fear is present, perception narrows. The mind sees danger where there may be none. It misreads tone, intention, and timing. Responses become mismatched to reality. Detachment widens perception. You see context, you notice nuance, you recognize what matters and what does not. This allows appropriate response. Appropriate response builds trust. People often confuse emotional intensity with care, but intensity fluctuates. Clarity endures. A detached person does not overpromise to feel secure. They do not agree just to avoid discomfort. They say what they can actually follow through on. This makes their words dependable. Fear-driven attachment often leads to inconsistency. One day you are fully available, the next day you are overwhelmed. Commitments are made in moments of emotion and broken when fear shifts. Detachment removes this swing. You commit only when aligned. Alignment creates follow-through. Reliability also means being emotionally available without being emotionally volatile. Detachment allows you to feel without flooding. When emotions are allowed to pass without being acted out, relationships stabilize. Others know what to expect from you. Not perfection, but steadiness. Steadiness builds safety. A person ruled by fear reacts to pressure by trying to control outcomes. They micromanage, they rush, they overcorrect. These behaviors often create more problems than they solve. Detachment responds to pressure by assessing what is needed now, what can wait, what is within my control, what is not. This assessment prevents unnecessary action. Unnecessary action creates chaos. Reliability is not doing everything. It is doing the right thing at the right time. Fear also distorts communication. Under fear, people either overshare to seek reassurance or shut down to protect themselves. Both disrupt trust. Detachment allows clear communication. You speak directly, you listen fully. You do not hide behind emotion or overwhelm others with it. Clear communication is reliable communication. Detachment also strengthens boundaries. Boundaries are often misunderstood as distance. In reality, they are structures that support consistency. When boundaries are weak, availability fluctuates. You give too much, then resent. You withdraw suddenly. This unpredictability erodes trust. Detachment supports boundaries because it removes guilt-driven behavior. You do not say yes to be liked. You say yes when it is true. This honesty allows others to rely on you realistically. Reliability also means emotional continuity. You do not punish others with withdrawal when uncomfortable feelings arise. You stay engaged even when things are difficult. Fear-driven attachment often withdraws when threatened. Detachment stays present. Presence in difficulty is one of the clearest signs of reliability. Detachment also changes how mistakes are handled. When fear rules, mistakes trigger defensiveness or shame. Energy goes into protecting image rather than correcting course. Detachment allows acknowledgement. You can admit error without collapse. You can repair without drama. Repair strengthens trust more than perfection ever could. A detached person is reliable because they are not busy managing how they appear. They are available to manage what is real. Fear-based behavior is unpredictable because fear shifts constantly. What feels safe one moment feels dangerous the next. Decisions made from fear are unstable. Detachment creates an internal reference point that does not fluctuate as wildly. You act from values rather than emotions alone. Values create consistency. Reliability also depends on patience. Fear rushes. It wants immediate resolution. Detachment tolerates uncertainty long enough to allow wise action. This patience prevents reactive decisions that must later be undone. Detachment does not make you passive, it makes you deliberate. Deliberate action is dependable. A person who is not ruled by fear does not escalate conflict unnecessarily. They do not take everything personally. They respond proportionally. Proportional response builds credibility. Others learn that you will not overreact. This allows them to be honest. Honesty strengthens relationships. Detachment also improves leadership. Leaders who act from fear create instability. Their moods dictate direction. Teams feel uncertain. Leaders who act from detachment provide clarity. They do not panic under pressure. They adjust without drama. This steadiness inspires confidence. Reliability is also about emotional resilience. When things go wrong, detached individuals do not collapse. They adapt. Adaptability is reliability in a changing world. Fear-based attachment resists change. It clings to plans. When plans fail, disorientation follows. Detachment expects change. Adjustment feels natural rather than threatening. This expectation prevents crisis thinking. Reliability also involves consistency over time. Fear-driven effort burns out. Detachment sustains. You show up not because adrenaline carries you, but because alignment supports you. Sustainable presence is reliable presence. Detachment also allows you to hold space for others without absorbing their emotions. You can support without becoming overwhelmed. This capacity is deeply reliable. People know they can bring difficulty to you without being met by panic. Fear-based empathy collapses under intensity. Detached empathy holds. Detachment does not remove care, it refines it. Reliable care is not frantic, it is steady. Detachment also improves decision-making under stress. Stress narrows options. Detachment keeps options visible. You choose with clarity rather than compulsion. This clarity reduces regret. Decisions made from detachment age well. Fear-based decisions often require explanation later. Detached decisions stand on their own. Reliability also means predictability in character, not in behavior. Others know how you will approach situations even if outcomes differ. They know you will listen. They know you will think. They know you will respond honestly. This predictability creates trust. Detachment also reduces emotional manipulation. When you are not seeking reassurance or validation, you do not use emotion to influence others. Your responses are cleaner. Others feel respected. Respect supports cooperation. A detached person does not disappear when they cannot fix something. They stay present even when solutions are unclear. Presence without fixing is often the most reliable support. Fear-driven attachment cannot tolerate helplessness. It either controls or withdraws. Detachment tolerates not knowing. This tolerance keeps connection intact. Reliability also shows up as emotional availability without dependency. You are there without needing something in return. This creates generosity without exhaustion. Detachment also improves timing. You know when to act and when to wait. Fear acts too soon or too late. Timing is a subtle but essential part of reliability. Detachment also reduces defensiveness. You do not protect ego, you protect clarity. This allows feedback to be integrated. Growth follows. Growth increases competence. Competence supports reliability. Fear-based attachment avoids feedback. Detachment welcomes it. Welcoming feedback improves performance. Reliability is not about never failing. It is about responding well when you do. Detachment supports this response. Fear magnifies failure. Detachment contextualizes it. This context prevents collapse. Reliability also involves emotional honesty. You do not pretend to be okay when you are not, nor do you dramatize difficulty. You communicate truthfully. Truthful communication builds trust. Detachment also helps you remain consistent across environments. You are not a different person depending on who is watching. Consistency of self builds reliability. Fear-driven behavior changes with audience. Detachment does not. Detachment also allows you to disengage when necessary without hostility. You step back cleanly rather than disappearing or attacking. This clean disengagement preserves relationships. Reliability includes knowing your limits and honoring them. Detachment clarifies limits. Fear obscures them. A detached person is reliable because they are not ruled by urgency, insecurity, or image. They respond rather than react. Response is thoughtful. Reaction is automatic. Thoughtful action builds trust. Detachment does not make you distant, it makes you dependable. Dependable because you are not pulled off center by fear. Dependable because you are present, clear, and consistent. Dependable because your actions come from alignment, not anxiety. This is the quiet strength of detachment. Not withdrawal from responsibility, but deeper responsibility. Not less care, but care that lasts. Not emotional distance, but emotional steadiness. Detachment does not make you less reliable. It makes you someone others can truly count on. You've seen it now, layer by layer, how holding tightly creates fear. How attachment turns love into tension, how clinging to identity, approval, the past or possessions quietly steals your peace. And how detachment is not loss, not coldness, not escape, but clarity. To hold lightly is not to care less. It is to care without fear. It is to trust that what truly belongs in your life does not need to be trapped to stay. What is real remains. What leaves was never meant to be owned. Detachment does not empty your life, it clears it. It returns you to presence, to steadiness, to a quiet strength that does not depend on certainty, control, or permission. When you stop gripping, life does not slip away, it settles. If something in this message stayed with you, leave a comment and write, "I choose to hold lightly." It helps this wisdom reach others who need it. And if this kind of depth, calm, and clarity matters to you, subscribe to the channel. More teachings like this are coming, and you won't want to miss them. Until next time, move gently through life, hold lightly, and trust what stays.